Imagine a world untouched by the breath of time, a place before memory, before myth when Earth was still cradled in its primal infancy. The oceans roared with untamed fury, their waves crashing against shores never tread by man. Thunder beasts roamed the jungles, their roars echoing across valleys. Insects as large as hounds buzzed through the underbrush. Winged reptiles soared above the peaks. The air was thick with the pulse of undirected life, unshaped, wild. The sky above was vast and pure, unmarked by smoke or metal. A vault of deep indigo, lit only by the cold fires of distant stars and the golden blaze of a younger sun. Forests spread like emerald oceans across the continents, breathing mist into the morning light. And into this chaos, 445,000 years ago, descended something that did not belong. Not a storm, not a beast. They pierced the atmosphere with unnatural precision, moving not like birds or clouds, but with intelligent purpose. The ocean hissed, boiled, then fell silent. These were celestial ships, radiant and humming with a frequency foreign to Earth, as if vibrating to the music of a distant star. Unlike Earth, Nibiru was no constant companion of the sun. It returned to the inner system once every 3,600 Earth years, drawn close for only a short time before vanishing into the black reaches once more. Yet that very shield, the veil that sustained them, had begun to decay. They came from the outer reaches of the solar system, or perhaps even beyond. Their hulls shimmered like liquid silver, glowing faintly with inscriptions that pulsed like breathing light. It could mend the sky, it could save their world. But a rift in the sky, a chariot of light, splitting the heavens like a blade of fire. Multiple vessels followed, trailing behind like the tails of comets. They struck the sea like thunder, vanishing beneath the waves off the coast of what is now the Persian Gulf. Towering, radiant, and alien, they were both beautiful and terrible to behold. Their skin bore a faint metallic sheen. Their eyes glowed like twin suns. They moved with grace that defied gravity, cloaked in robes woven from fibers that shimmered like starlight. To the creatures of Earth, they were gods. Earth had been claimed, but it was more than a shelter. It was a marvel of celestial engineering. At its heart stood a control centra ziggurat-like structure, humming with energy, surrounded by fields of strange machines and towers crowned with crystals. It hosted a spaceport capable of launching their skyships to and from Nibiru. It held communication chambers that could transmit messages across planetary distances, and it maintained a passage through the red planet Lamu, known to us as Mars, which served as an intermediary way station. Teams of laborers and Anunnaki of lower caste were deployed to the task. Day after day they toiled, harnessing the power of crystal tools and energy rods, sifting through mud and salt to retrieve flecks of treasure. But Earth resisted. From those vessels emerged beings not born of Earth's womb, the Anunnaki. That honor had been given to his half-brother, Enlil, by decree of succession, a decision that birthed a quiet storm between them. Where Enlil embodied command and control, Enki was the architect of Wonderza, master of waters, of science, and of hidden knowledge. But they had not come to conquer. Enki found solace in the flow of life, be it rivers, thoughts, or stars. The swamplands below what we now know as southern Mesopotamia shimmered with silt and brine, perfect for early settlement. The sea, the sky, the soil, all aligned in harmony for his purpose. Beings who could endure the weight of Earth's gravity, the bite of its sun, the the poison of its beasts. Beings who could multiply and servand, perhaps, in time. Think, not yet. They came with a mission, born of desperation. Their homeworld, Nibiru, a wandering planet that carved an immense elliptical path through the solar system, was dying. Exhaustion crept into their bones like rust. A planet of extreme heat and ice, darkness and fire. Life on Nibiru had flourished in strange ways, protected by an atmosphere thick and volatile, charged with electrical storms and volcanic breath. The Anunnaki, in their wisdom, discovered a solution. Goldwind ground into a fine, monatomic powder and suspended into the upper skies could reflect harmful radiation and retain heat. But Nibiru's own veins had long run dry. The gold was gone, and so the search began. Across the stars they wandered, until their instruments found a glimmer, blue-green gem of a world, rich in minerals, alive with abundance, Earth. And so they came. The expedition was led by one among them, whose name would echo across the corridors of time. Enki. He was no ordinary traveler. Son of Anu, the high sovereign of Nibiru, Enki was the firstborn of royal blood, but not the heir to the throne. His name meant he whose home is water, a title both literal and symbolic. As his ship descended into Earth's dense atmosphere, Enki observed the terrain with a mind already seeking patterns. Here, the Anunnaki established their first colony, Eridu, name that meant home in the faraway. But the Anunnaki were not settlers in the human sense. They had no interest in conquest, dominion, or culture. Their goal was singular: extraction. They came for Earth's golden lifeblood. Beneath the marshes, they believed, lay veins of gold waiting to be unearthed. Copper, yes, but gold scarce, elusive, hidden, and the work was grueling. The Anunnaki, for all their knowledge, were finite. Their bodies, though advanced, wore down. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the camps. A crisis was unfolding. They needed workers. And here Enki's genius rose like the morning star. As he wandered the lands near Eridu, he observed the primitive hominids, creatures of muscle and bone, who walked upright and lived in small family bands. Their minds were dim, their language guttural, but in their eyes Enki saw a flicker, potential. He returned to Eridu and summoned Ninhursag, his half-sister chief geneticist of the Anunnaki. Known as the Lady of the Sacred Mountain, she was a figure of immense skill and deep compassion. There, beneath lights that pulsed like stars, they studied the ancient codes woven into the blood and marrow of these beings. They read the language of life itself, but he was sterile, a singular vessel, not a lineage. Her knowledge of genetics rivaled Enki's own, and together they began the greatest experiment in the history of two worlds. They took from the Anunnaki their clarity of thought, their structure, their fire. From the hominids, they took strength, endurance, adaptability. They gathered hominids from the forests, brought them into the sterile sanctum of the life chambers deep beneath Eridu. Using a fusion of biology and frequency manipulation, what we might today mistake for magic, they began to splice and bind. And from that alchemy of flesh and will, they created the first Adamu to him. They were no more than animated tools, useful, yes, but dangerous if left unchecked. Enki, however, saw them differently. They had forged a new species, one born of earth and sky, one that carried within it a spark, perhaps too bright to control. He showed them how to till the earth, to gather reeds and bind them into homes. The Anunnaki became gods. Their stories were etched into clay and sung by firelight. These were the first mythstales that would ripple into the civilizations of Sumer, Kemet, and far beyond. He taught them to read the winds and the stars. And slowly, Eridu became something new, crucible, where divine and mortal lived side by side. He was not born of woman, but of vat and light. His body was lean, his limbs long. His eyes shimmered with new awareness. He could understand command. He could perform tasks. A second breath. She would become known as Tiamat, Mother of Life. They held the blueprints of civilization, farming, city planning, mathematics, healing, language. The chosen became priests, scribes, architects of the future. This would not do. Their villages became towns. Tablets said to be dictated by Enki himself to his scribe Badopa, human unlike any other. These tablets, it was said, revealed more than science. They spoke of Nibiru's wars, its kings, its long-lost crimes, when judgment would come not just for mankind, but for the gods themselves. A story whose echoes we hear even now in our oldest scriptures and deepest dreams. Their minds awakened. And to Enlil, this was unacceptable. He saw the gold glinting in the marshes, destined to save a dying world. But he also saw the humans, his children, lifting their eyes to the stars. And so Enki returned to the chamber, and with Ninhursag made a second form, this time female. To her they gave the gift of fertility. Her creation marked a turning point. With her, the human race could sustain itself. It could grow. It could learn. But Enki knew the line had been crossed. They had not simply made laborers, and the debate began. Enlil, now commander of the Earth mission, looked upon the humans with disdain. He saw wonder. He taught them. He nurtured them. He gave them shelter, tools, language. The humans, or Earthlings, as they were called, gazed upon their creators with reverence. And Enki, ever the teacher, took another step. He chose among the humans a few those with vision and shared with them the crystalline discs inscribed with divine knowledge. But Enlil watched with growing alarm. Knowledge was power. Power was danger. The humans multiplied swiftly. He demanded restraint, limitations, boundaries. Enki refused. He believed Earth's children should shape their own fate, not live forever in the shadow of their makers. And so the seeds of conflict were sown between brothers, between ideologies, control versus freedom, fear versus hope. And still whispers grew. Among the humans given the stories began to circulate of ancient tablets, etched in glowing blue lapis lazuli, and they foretold its return. When Nibiru would once again cross near Earth, when the gods would walk again. The birth of humanity was not the end of the tale. It was the beginning of a cosmic drama, rebellion, secrets, cataclysms, and awakening. And Enki, standing on the high terraces of Eridu, looked out over a world changed by his hand, and he knew a spark had been lit, and no power in heaven or earth could unmake the fire to come. In the beginning, the sun was not just a star, it was a cradle, a living flame suspended in the heavens, casting its golden blood across the plains of the infant earth. Their life blood gold had grown scarce on Nibiru. This rare element, they discovered, had the ability to stabilize their atmosphere and prolong their lifespans. But it was buried deep within the earth of another world. Beneath this fire, mankind first drew breath, but humanity did not rise on its own. The breath that filled their lungs had come from another world, entirely from Nibiru, a distant, these beings, cloaked in light and wisdom. arrived in ancient times when the land was still wild and unformed. Mountains had no names. Rivers knew no boundaries. Earth was raw, innocent, and it would not remain so. And troubled planet, far beyond the reaches of modern telescopes, shrouded in the cold and silent dark. Walls of mud brick stretched toward the heavens, engraved with tales of divine births, cosmic battles, and edicts from the sky. These were not myths, they were memories. There, a great and dying race looked toward the blue orb of Earth and saw salvation. They bore children upon this planet, gods born not of Nibiru, but of Earth itself. And these younger Anunnaki, untethered from the old laws, looked upon the world not as a mission, but as a kingdom. They were the Anunnaki, the mighty ones, the shining beings who crossed the stars in search of survival, of pride, of rivalry among the gods themselves. That world was ours. He believed humans had the potential to rise, to learn, to one day walk beside their gods. And so they came descending not as conquerors, but as engineers of fate. They were declarations of presence. The humans were no longer content to serve. They were beginning to remember. To him, humans were tools, yes, but unruly. Too many, too fast. Their ambitions were swelling, their temples multiplying. Enlil saw in them not allies, but seeds of rebellion. He stirred hearts. He called upon humans to rise and recognize Marduk's divine mandate, a danger to the order their father had fought to preserve. Born of Earth and Anunnaki, he was unlike any who came before him. Heated words echoed through marble halls. Enki pleaded for patience, urging the gods not to turn against their own blood. But the younger Anunnaki had grown impatient. They saw Earth as theirs now. They had no interest in the long cycles of Nibiru. They wanted power. Now he bore his father's cunning and his mother's earthly fire. To his followers, he was a visionary. To his enemies, a usurper. In the warm cradle of the Fertile Crescent, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved lifelines through the land, the Anunnaki began their great labor. These were relics of Nibiru's ancient wars, terrible instruments of fire and poison, nuclear weapons. They could burn mountains to dust, boil seas, rewrite the skies. They dug vast mines in the mountains and deserts, working tirelessly. But even with their advanced technology, the toil became unbearable. His eyes burned with hatred for Marduk and all who followed him. His words were fire. He accused Marduk of treason. He blamed Enki for raising a generation of rebels. You would poison the earth for your pride, he asked. And then, in a moment that would echo through eternity, he made a proposal. And so Enki, the wise and compassionate son of the high god Anu, conceived a solution. He claimed it as his inheritance, his kingdom by birthright. In the city of Babylon, still young, still rising, he established his domain. And from this seat of power, he made a bold declaration. He would fashion a new beinga, servant species, from the clay of the earth, and the essence of the Anunnaki, Enki, and the mother goddess Ninhursag created mankind. The first humans were not born but forged. They were engineered to be strong, obedient, and tireless. And so, under the gaze of their creators, humanity began its existence working the mines, tilling the fields, raising ziggurats in honor of gods they could never fully understand. For thousands of years, humans toiled under sun and moon, pulling precious gold from the earth. The gods watched, and earth changed. Cities, Rosiadu, Yor, Nippur, Urukich, a sacred flame in the darkness, each a testament to the divine order. But beneath the surface of these golden ages, beneath the thrum of temples and the hymns of priest-kings, a shadow grew. It was not a shadow of war, nor of nature. It was a storm of ambition. For while the Anunnaki had come to Earth as a united force, time and Earth's gravity changed them. At the center of this divine storm were two brothers, Enki and Enlil. Enki, the creator of mankind, favored wisdom and compassion. Enlil, lord of the command and keeper of order, saw only danger in this. The cities they built, the songs they sang, the monuments they raised, these were not merely acts of devotion, and that frightened the gods. The rise of Marduk. From within this ancient drama, a new figure emerged: Marduk, firstborn son of Enki. Marduk dreamed not of Nibiru, but of Earth. He would be king of Earth. This announcement shook the heavens, for it was not just a claim to land, it was a challenge to the entire celestial hierarchy. Marduk's brother, Nabu, a master orator and scholar, spread the word among humankind. He spoke in temples, marketplaces, and schools. This boldness enraged the followers of Enlil, his children. Ninurta, the warrior, and Nergal, the enforcer of the lower realms, saw Marduk not as a leader, but as a heretic. To them, Marduk was a virus infecting the divine body. He had to be silenced, and so the councils were summoned. In the sacred city of Nippur, under black banners of judgment, the gods gathered. What happened next would be etched into the bones of Earth itself. The unforgivable decision in that council. One voice broke through the clamor: Ninurta, let us unleash the weapons of old. These were not swords, not arrows, not flames. The room fell silent. Even among gods, the memory of those weapons stirred terror. Their names were whispered, not spoken. Their power was not merely destructive, was cosmic. Nergal, ever the executioner, stood beside Ninurta and offered to carry out the task himself. Enki objected with fury, but the tide had turned. Anu, listening from the cold silence of Nibiru through a long-range celestial device, spoke at last. His voice was cold, measured. He authorized the strike with a condition. Only the rebel cities were to be targeted. Only those loyal to Marduk, the innocent, were to be spared. But divine fire does not discriminate, and so, with hearts heavy and hands trembling, Ninurta and Nergal prepared the weapons in secret. As the council dispersed, Enki retreated to Eridu, his beloved city. There, beneath its foundations, he sealed sacred tablets of knowledge and prepared for the storm to come. The sun, golden and serene, rose over the temples and towers of Sumer. Priests lit incense. Farmers led oxen into the fields. Children laughed in the shadow of ziggurats, and above them, death stirred. The day the sky burned, it began with a dawn like any other. The devices, described in ancient texts as cloaked in dread and glory, hummed with malevolent light. Ninurta and Nergal activated the weapons from a remote plateau. Then came the flash. A blinding light split the heavens. It glowed faintly, laced with invisible death. It swept across the land with the silent speed of judgment. The earth trembled. Temples cracked, walls melted. Those who looked to the sky were blinded. Those who ran found no escape. And then the wind came, but there was no answer. The wind swallowed her cries. It was not a wind of nature. It was an evil wind, spoken of in whispers and lamentations. Crops withered. Livestock died. The rivers turned to sludge. The very air became a weapon. The kind of silence left in the wake of screaming. Cities that once rang with hymns and hammers now lay buried beneath pale ash. Statues cracked, columns slumped, water turned black. The once proud rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, now dragged thick mud like wounded veins. In the deep cellars of temples, in underground granaries, in caves, high in the Zagros mountains, pockets of humanity clung to life. Blind, burned, coughing blood, they staggered from ruins, wrapped in rags and memory. And when they looked to the skies, they saw no gods. The first city fell, instantly its name, now lost to time. Its people turned to ash in the blink of an eye. The cloud of poison traveled east, guided by the wind. It devoured everything in its path, fields, rivers, orchards, entire civilizations. City after city, Ur, Nippur, Lagash, Eridu crumbled. Even those not loyal to Marduk fell. The wind did not know loyalty. In the broken libraries of Nippur, he found fragments of mathematics that once mapped the stars. In Uruk, he found ritual tablets encoded in harmonic resonance. In Lagash, he found nothing, only glass and silence. In his retreat, he saw the gods' creations unraveling. Only a few remained. Enlil, witnessing the devastation, launched his skyship and fled the Earth's surface. From his hidden vault beneath the sands of Eridu, he emerged weeks later, alone. They had seen the destruction in dreams. They had known the gods would fall. These were the keepers of the deep fire, an ancient sect once shunned as heretics. His skin was cracked, his eyes dim, but in his hands he held something fragile yet eternal, the tablets of destiny, records of Earth's true past. Not the myths, not the royal lies, but the actual unfolding of time etched in star metal and living code. The goddess Nanch, daughter of Enlil, fell to her knees in her temple, pleading for her people's lives. And Enki, standing atop the walls of Eridu, looked west and saw the cloud approaching. His heart shattered. He turned to his wife Ninki and gave the order, "We leave, now." When the wind had passed, silence fell upon Sumer. It was not a silence of peace, but of stunned desolation. Birds no longer flew above, even the insects fled. But from this silence, survivors crawled. Not all had perished in the cleansing. The Anunnaki were gone. The Council had fled to orbiting stations, then to Mars outposts, and finally back to Nibiru, leaving the Earth to bury its dead and forget. Among them was Enki, whose sorrow eclipsed even his defiance. He wandered the desolate cities, collecting the remnants of knowledge. He wept, and yet something stirred. The return of the hidden orders. In the far mountains, beyond the reach of the wind, where the poisons did not travel, there lived those who had long withdrawn from the cities, mystics, astronomer, priests, and oracles. When the cities fell, they emerged from their sanctuaries, clad in robes dyed with mineral ink, their faces hidden by symbols of the old tongue. They journeyed into the ruins. They gathered survivors, recorded testimonies, and invoked forbidden names in whispered tones. They did not worship the gods as saviors, but as cosmic forces, archetypes, triggers in an eternal cycle of growth and collapse. One of their number, a high oracle named Seluma, stood before the fallen gates of Ur and declared to the ash-drenched wind, "The gods did not leave us. They burned their names into the stone." There began to compile what would one day be called the Silent Gospels, the story not of one god, a rogue world, a harbinger, a teacher, but of a cosmic family whose bloodlines seeded the earth, fractured and fell, and await our remembering. These keepers built sanctums within caves and catacombs, far from the reach of any rising empire. These texts described Nibiru not as a planet of salvation, but as a wandering scar in the solar wound. Great floods followed, as mountains wept and rivers spilled in grief. Some called it climate collapse, others divine punishment, but the keepers knew it was Earth mourning. These were Earth's dreams, channeled through root, stone, and tide, and Earth as its most sacred child. The Earth laments across the world. Tremors continued for years. The ash cloud circled the planet, turning skies red and crops bitter. In caves painted long before the cataclysm, ancient prophecies had foretold the rise and fall of gods made flesh. These were not human stories. In a hidden cavern beneath the Sinai Peninsula, where the winds could not reach, he gathered the remaining knowledge of the Anunnaki, their language, science, genetic sequences, and spiritual blueprints. These became the vaults of the starseed buried across the planet, beneath the Andes, beneath Giza, beneath the floor of the Pacific. Geologists would one day call them tectonic resonances, but the keepers called it the deep voice, Earth rebalancing after a divine trauma. The planet had memory. The wind carried whispers. In the far north, survivors began hearing strange harmonics from deep below the ground, low vibrations, like choirs of sleeping beasts. And from this voice came a warning: the gods will rise again. But first, their names must die. The second covenant Enki, aware of the chaos left behind, began enacting a final plan, not of dominance, but of preservation. With the help of Seluma and a small human council, he encoded this knowledge into song, symbol, and stone. These were not libraries. They were living memories, designed to awaken only when humanity reached a certain vibration, when we remembered not just facts, but our origin. As Enki sealed the final vault, he looked to Seluma and spoke words she would never forget. Marduk's name became muddied, feared. Enlil became a storm god. Enki, a trickster. They will forget. They must. But the blood remembers. And when the stars return, so shall we. He vanished soon after into the desert winds, or into another dimension, as some say. The prophecy of the starborn: they would be dreamers, artists, wanderers, seekers. They would carry the echo of Enki's voice, scattered through generations. Centuries passed. Something ancient stirs when we hear the names Enki, Inanna, Ninhursag, Marduk. Empires rose from the dust of the old cities: Babylon, Assyria, Persia, each claiming the gods as their own, twisting the old stories into tales of conquest. The real history was buried, but the prophecy remained. It spoke of a time when Earth would once again enter alignment with Nibiru, a great return, when the planet's orbit would bring the twin worlds close once more. In this time, it was said, 3 signs would appear. The skies would burn, strange lights and falling stars. The waters would rise, oceans reclaiming their ancient paths, and the children of the Anunnaki, those carrying divine fragments in their blood, would awaken. These children would not be kings. They would not be priests. And when they gathered, unknowingly, irresistibly, the vaults would open. What was forgotten still breathes today. We live among ruins. We call them myths. We study their bricks. We decode their stars. And yet, a part of us remembers. We do not know why. In our DNA, in our symbols, in our obsessions with pyramids, floods, gods from the sky. We echo truths that academia cannot cage. And perhaps that is the final lesson of the Anunnaki, that power corrupts even gods, that the earth is not merely a resource, but a living record, and that memory, once buried, will rise again. The ashes of Sumer lay thick upon the windswept plains, gray dust that once formed palaces, ziggurats, and the trembling bones of kings. The Fertile Crescent, the cradle of ancient wonder, had been seared into silence. The Anunnaki's great endeavor had faltered. Their celestial knowledge, so advanced, had failed to foresee the fallout of divine rivalry. A celestial enigma with an orbit so vast it transcended mortal lifetimes, taking 3,600 years to complete a single revolution a cycle, the Anunnaki called a Shah. It was more than a measurement of time. It was prophecy in motion, fate cast upon the stars, cosmic radiation, asteroid impacts, and the slow entropy of the universe had worn it thin. They discovered that gold, ground into fine particulate dust and released into the stratosphere, could reflect solar radiation and rebuild their planetary shield. This alchemy was salvation, but also a curse, for gold was scarce on Nibiru. Its mines had long been exhausted, its veins bled dry by centuries of extraction, and so the eyes of the Anunnaki turned outward, toward Earth. The integrity of Nibiru's atmospheric veil weakened, and with it came existential dread. Their sweat and blood paved the path to Nibiru's salvation. But with consciousness came questions. With labor came rebellion. The very gift that made mankind useful intelligence so made them dangerous. Through their crystalline lenses and star-bound observatories, they saw its rivers, its mountains, its deep crust glimmering with the promise of salvation. Every 3,600 years, its approach sent shockwaves through the solar system. Gravitational tides pulled at planets, stirred the sun, and caused tectonic convulsions on Earth. Floods came, volcanoes awoke, the heavens flickered with strange lights. A wind, invisible but deadly, swept across the plains. Temples cracked and burned. Kings died, gasping in golden halls. And the rivers, once sacred, ran poisoned. Summer's downfall became the echoing bell of Anunnaki folly. These celestial events became encoded in human memory, transformed into myths, signs, and sacred calendars. Did the approach of their home world stir more than tides? Did it awaken something in the soul? From their distant perch on Nibiru, Earth appeared not as a primitive planet, but as a sacred vault ripe for divine intervention. Enki called it the day of re-entering, a moment when the crimson planet passed closest to Earth, and destiny was measured in fire. Anunnaki factions, already divided by ambition, found their grievances magnified by celestial tension. Temples dedicated to him sprang up. Priests changed their chants. The old guard grew fearful, and in fear they acted. The weapons of terror, ancient devices from Nibiru's arsenal, were unleashed not against Marduk directly, but upon the cities that supported him. Marduk, son of Enki and heir to a bold new vision, claimed sovereignty over Earth. He saw himself not as a steward, but as a king, a god of men. His ascendants clashed with the old order, led by Ninurta, and Nergal viewed Marduk as a dangerous usurper. At these times, the actions of gods and mortals were weighed. Power shifted, wars ignited, and fate, that ancient river, changed course. The once golden skies of their world turned pale, crops failed, winds grew colder. A being of immense wisdom and cunning, Enki was tasked with overseeing the Earth mission. The Council of Nibiru grew restless. It was then, in the heart of this tension, that Enki proposed the unthinkable, the creation of a servant race, born of earth but molded by the divine spark. Mankind was born not of evolution, but of intention, born not to rule, but to serve. From his seat in Eridu, the first Anunnaki settlement on Earth, he orchestrated a vast operation. First, they filtered gold from the waters of the Persian Gulf, a slow, meticulous process that yielded little. Later, the search drove them to the Abzu, the ancient land of gold, deep in the mountains of southern Africa. There, in hidden caverns, they discovered vast, untouched veins of ore enough, they believed, to save a world. And the breath of their planet, so carefully balanced, began to falter. Nuclear winds had raised the heart of Earth's first civilization, turning the sacred cities of Sumer, Eridu, and Nippur to smoldering graveyards. It defied the sun's embrace, spiraling in an elliptical path that carried it from the warm interior of the system into the cold void beyond Pluto's reach. For part of its cycle, it shone red in the sky, warming under the sun's gaze. In that season, life thrived, civilizations awakened, and the Anunnaki gazed outward with ambition. But as it drifted away, Nibiru turned frigid, a frozen wanderer whose only warmth came from the explosive breath of its volcanoes. These fiery eruptions cast great clouds of ash and gas into the atmosphere, forming a shimmering, reflective barrier that held the chill of space at bay. What remained was not only ruins, but questions that turned the gaze of both gods and men upward toward the stars. Where once priests whispered in moonlit temples, now silence reigned, silence so heavy, so total, that even the gods seemed to mourn. This silence was not mere emptiness, but an echo of catastrophe, a divine misstep that shattered a golden age. The winds that now blew across the ruins carried the scent of scorched stone and irradiated soil. For beyond the veil of scorched skies and fractured lands, there loomed the great mystery of their origin. Nibiru, the crimson wanderer, the lost planet whose dance through the heavens shaped the fate of two worlds. Nibiru was not like the other planets of the solar system. Yet over time, even this natural shield began to falter. In desperation, the sages of Nibiru turned to an ancient art, metallurgy. Earth, a world brimming with untouched treasure, sparkled in their observations. It was Enki, the master scientist and firstborn son of Anu, who led the descent. But such mining was laborious and treacherous. The Anunnaki themselves, beings of science, not toil, grew weary and rebellious. Some laid down their tools, others demanded to return home. These humans, crafted in the image of their creators, were set to work in the gold mines. Yet the cycle of Nibiru pressed on, indifferent to the conflicts below. To the Anunnaki, the return of Nibiru was not merely a cosmic event, it was a judgment. It marked times of reckoning, of transformation. It was during one such approach, when Nibiru came roaring back into the heart of the solar system, that catastrophe struck. Amid omens in the stars, dream visions, and secret prophecies, Marduk's rise became inevitable. Thus fell Sumer, not by human hand but by divine wrath. The skies turned black, yet within this ruin lay questions deeper than blame. Was this merely the result of ambition, or was it the reflection of Nibiru's influence? Enki, always the seeker, pondered such mysteries. In hidden chambers beneath the ruins of Eridu, he recorded his thoughts on lapis lazuli. He spoke of fate and destiny, of cycles that bound not only planets, but hearts. Destiny, he wrote, is the river that bends with choice. Fate is the mountain that will not move. To Enki, the tragedy of Sumer was not simply the price of pride, but the result of forgetting the wisdom of cycles. The Anunnaki had come to Earth as masters, but Earth had changed them. In their creations, they saw reflections. In mankind's struggle, they glimpsed their own. Astronomers watched the skies for its crimson eye, and in clay tablets and stone monuments, the warning was etched: Nibiru shall return. To them, Enki whispered the truth: Nibiru will return again, and when it does, the wheel shall turn anew. But this time, the seed must awaken from within, into symbols, into myths, into bloodlines, and buried codes. He withdrew into the lands far to the westlands, untouched by the fallout, shielded by ocean and stone. Others remained behind, watchers, mentors, hidden powers, guiding in silence. It is said his voice echoes in thunder, and his gaze remains fixed upon the ancient stargates lest they open again. Ninurta, the warrior, chose exile beneath ice, and Ninhursag, mother of humanity, retreated into deep green places, forests, where time slows and dreams speak. They no longer walked in daylight, but in legend. Each carried fragments of the Anunnaki legacy pyramids, sacred numbers, sky maps carved in stone. The tale of Nibiru passed into myth, mistranslated as heaven, destroyer, wormwood, or angel. There he began anew. New names, new myths. Some called him Ra, others saw him in the feathered serpent. He wore many faces, but his desire endured, to rule Earth as its rightful god. Not as a god above, but as a whisper below. Her children, once bound to divine servitude, had tasted autonomy. They had fallen, yes, but also risen, again and again. Atlantis fell, Mu drowned, harmonic tones tuned to Earth's Schumann resonance. They knew. When Nibiru next arrived, it would not simply bring chaos, it would test the frequency of Earth itself. Yet new cultures emerged from the ash, building temples aligned to Sirius and Orion. Ancient languages flickered in the minds of children. Some felt drawn to old ruins, others heard music in the wind. The boundary between dream and memory blurred, planting myths like seeds, waiting for the harvest of memory. His essence flowed into rivers, into seeds, into the dream memory of humanity. In secret chambers, they activated crystalline codices, encoded with frequencies only the human heart could decode. Not machines, not language, but resonance. For the new awakening would not be sparked by fire or metal, but by vibration. Its gravitational field stretched invisibly across space, tugging at the sun, causing solar storms, earthquakes, floods. But it also tugged at consciousness. Every tree, every cave, every ripple in water held echoes of forgotten epochs, and humankind, crafted of both clay and celestial essence, was not a failed experiment, but a bridge between worlds. The survivors, human and divine, alike wandered the ruins. Some built new temples, others retreated into shadows. The knowledge of Nibiru became a sacred mystery. Priests whispered its name. And when the stars began to shift again, when red Mars grew restless, and the comets changed course, the whispers returned. The star of crossing awakens. As centuries passed and the ruins of Sumer were slowly swallowed by earth and sand, the memory of the Anunnaki did not die, it descended. The sun began to flare with renewed fury. Magnetic poles trembled. Birds flew wrong. Dreams turned prophetic. Across continents, seers, shamans, and scientists, separated by oceans but united in intuition, began to sense it. Nibiru approaches. Enki, filled with sorrow, yet unwilling to abandon his creation, convened a secret council. It was not held in temples of stone, but in caverns beneath the earth vaults, hidden beneath riverbeds, glaciers, and blackened forests. There, he entrusted his final wisdom to the keepers of the starseed, a brotherhood of sages and dreamers chosen from humankind. The survivors, those few among both gods and men scattered across the earth, taking with them fragments of the lost knowledge. They were neither kings nor warriors, but listeners, those whose souls could still hear the resonance of creation. He spoke of Earth not as a battlefield, but as a living library, a sentient vault, encoded with memory. Enki knew the war had not ended with the fall of Sumer. It had only changed shape, for Marduk, though struck by loss and humbled by consequence, did not perish, and the Anunnaki they divided. Some returned to Nibiru when it next passed, boarding starships in sorrow, their gold gathered, their hearts heavy, and Lil, hardened and unrepentant, vanished into the mountains. But Enki, he lingered, and so time passed. Millennia turned like slow cogs in the divine machine. Empires rose upon the bones of Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, Greece. But in secret, the watchers remembered. Astronomers in ancient temples noticed strange anomalies in planetary orbits, and with it, the cycle begins anew. But this time, something had changed. The earth, though wounded by ancient wars, had grown wise. The keepers of the starseed watched over these awakenings. In hidden valleys and atop forgotten ziggurats, these keepers began to chant. The crimson planet, nearing once more on its slow return, was stirring the solar winds. Humans across the globe began to feel strange surges of insight, remembrance, and fear. Forgotten dreams returned. Enki, always the seeker, pondered such mysteries. In hidden chambers, beneath the ruins of Eridu, he recorded his thoughts on lapis lazuli. He spoke of fate and destiny, of cycles that bound not only planets, but hearts. Destiny, he wrote, is the river that bends with choice. Fate is the mountain that will not move. To Enki, the tragedy of Sumer was not simply the price of pride, but the result of forgetting the wisdom of cycles. The Anunnaki had come to Earth as masters, but Earth had changed them. In their creations, they saw reflections. In mankind's struggle, they glimpsed their own. Astronomers watched the skies for its crimson eye, and in clay tablets and stone monuments, the warning was etched: Nibiru shall return. To them, Enki whispered the truth: Nibiru will return again, and when it does, the wheel shall turn anew. But this time, the seed must awaken from within, into symbols, into myths, into bloodlines, and buried codes. He withdrew into the lands far to the westlands, untouched by the fallout, shielded by ocean and stone. Others remained behind, watchers, mentors, hidden powers, guiding in silence. It is said his voice echoes in thunder, and his gaze remains fixed upon the ancient stargates lest they open again. Ninurta, the warrior, chose exile beneath ice, and Ninhursag, mother of humanity, retreated into deep green places, forests, where time slows and dreams speak. They no longer walked in daylight, but in legend. Each carried fragments of the Anunnaki legacy pyramids, sacred numbers, sky maps carved in stone. The tale of Nibiru passed into myth, mistranslated as heaven, destroyer, wormwood, or angel. There, he began anew. New names, new myths. Some called him Ra, others saw him in the feathered serpent. He wore many faces, but his desire endured, to rule Earth as its rightful god. Not as a god above, but as a whisper below. Her children, once bound to divine servitude, had tasted autonomy. They had fallen, yes, but also risen, again and again. Atlantis fell, Mu drowned, harmonic tones tuned to Earth's Schumann resonance. They knew. When Nibiru next arrived, it would not simply bring chaos, it would test the frequency of Earth itself. Yet new cultures emerged from the ash, building temples aligned to Sirius and Orion. Ancient languages flickered in the minds of children. Some felt drawn to old ruins, others heard music in the wind. The boundary between dream and memory blurred, planting myths like seeds, waiting for the harvest of memory. His essence flowed into rivers, into seeds, into the dream memory of humanity. In secret chambers, they activated crystalline codices, encoded with frequencies only the human heart could decode. Not machines, not language, but resonance. For the new awakening would not be sparked by fire or metal, but by vibration. Its gravitational field stretched invisibly across space, tugging at the sun, causing solar storms, earthquakes, floods. But it also tugged at consciousness. Every tree, every cave, every ripple in water held echoes of forgotten epochs, and humankind, crafted of both clay and celestial essence, was not a failed experiment, but a bridge between worlds. The survivors, human and divine, alike wandered the ruins. Some built new temples, others retreated into shadows. The knowledge of Nibiru became a sacred mystery. Priests whispered its name. And when the stars began to shift again, when red Mars grew restless, and the comets changed course, the whispers returned. The star of crossing awakens. As centuries passed and the ruins of Sumer were slowly swallowed by earth and sand, the memory of the Anunnaki did not die, it descended. The sun began to flare with renewed fury. Magnetic poles trembled. Birds flew wrong. Dreams turned prophetic. Across continents, seers, shamans, and scientists, separated by oceans, but united in intuition, began to sense it. Nibiru approaches. Enki, filled with sorrow, yet unwilling to abandon his creation, convened a secret council. It was not held in temples of stone, but in caverns beneath the earth vaults, hidden beneath riverbeds, glaciers, and blackened forests. There, he entrusted his final wisdom to the keepers of the starseed, a brotherhood of sages and dreamers chosen from humankind. The survivors, those few among both gods and men scattered across the earth, taking with them fragments of the lost knowledge. They were neither kings nor warriors, but listeners, those whose souls could still hear the resonance of creation. He spoke of Earth not as a battlefield, but as a living library, a sentient vault encoded with memory. Enki knew the war had not ended with the fall of Sumer. It had only changed shape, for Marduk, though struck by loss and humbled by consequence, did not perish, and the Anunnaki they divided. Some returned to Nibiru when it next passed, boarding starships in sorrow, their gold gathered, their hearts heavy, and Lil, hardened and unrepentant, vanished into the mountains. But Enki, he lingered, and so time passed. Millennia turned like slow cogs in the divine machine. Empires rose upon the bones of Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, Greece. But in secret, the Watchers remembered. Astronomers in ancient temples noticed strange anomalies in planetary orbits, and with it, the cycle begins anew. But this time, something had changed. The Earth, though wounded by ancient wars, had grown wise. The keepers of the starseed watched over these awakenings. In hidden valleys and atop forgotten ziggurats, these keepers began to chant. The crimson planet, nearing once more on its slow return, was stirring the solar winds. Humans across the globe began to feel strange surges of insight, remembrance, and fear. Forgotten dreams returned. This was the Anunnaki inheritance, awakening, not just in bloodlines, but in soil lines. The Anunnaki had crafted humans as workers, but they had underestimated the power of the divine spark. Over thousands of years, human consciousness had evolved. Pain had become wisdom, loss had become longing, and longing had become a bridge, a call that now reached even the skies. On Nibiru, those who remained watched Earth's flickering light with unease. New voices arose, young, visionary Anunnaki, who saw Earth not as a mine, but as a mirror. These dreamers recalled Enki's final teachings. They read the star maps etched in Earth's pyramids, and they wept. Their own civilization, now ancient and faded, had become hollow. The Andes sang. In the east, temples shivered beneath eclipses. All across the world, the resonance was rising. Golden skies were gone. They had mined salvation, but lost purpose. Some began to wonder, did we leave behind our true legacy? And so they prepared not for invasion, but for a reckoning. A beacon, not of surrender, but of invitation. The old war between Marduk and the Council was long buried, not doctrine. The human soul, forged in toil and longing, now carries the echo of stars. We are no longer slaves, nor children. We are the convergence of clay and cosmos, of memory and possibility, but a knowing, a flicker of ancient memory, that once we walked with giants. Their chants formed geometric waves in the air. Light took shape. Old symbols ignited. That once we were shaped by star-born hands. That once we fell not just from paradise, but from purpose. For they realized Earth had become something more, something sacred. As Nibiru drew near, the veil between dimensions thinned. The ancient stargates dormant for eons begged to hum. Lightless corridors beneath the Sphinx trembled. And in the hearts of humankind, something long buried began to stir. Remembrance. Not fear, but now that purpose calls again. The keepers activated the final phase. In sacred groves, beside obsidian pools, in stone circles, older than writing, they gathered. And from these rituals, a message was sent not in words, but in frequency. Return not as rulers, but as kin. Not to enslave, but to remember. Whether the Anunnaki will answer remains unknown, but the Earth has awakened. And as the crimson light of Nibiru returns to the sky, its meaning is no longer doom, but a mirror. The gods who shaped us may soon look upon a world that no longer fears them, but welcomes them home, not as lords, but as ancestors. This was the Anunnaki inheritance, awakening, not just in bloodlines, but in soil lines. The Anunnaki had crafted humans as workers, but they had underestimated the power of the divine spark. Over thousands of years, human consciousness had evolved. Pain had become wisdom. Loss had become longing, and longing had become a bridge, a call that now reached even the skies. On Nibiru, those who remained watched Earth's flickering light with unease. New voices arose, young, visionary Anunnaki, who saw Earth not as a mine, but as a mirror. These dreamers recalled Enki's final teachings. They read the star maps etched in Earth's pyramids, and they wept. Their own civilization, now ancient and faded, had become hollow. The Andes sang. In the east, temples shivered beneath eclipses. All across the world, the resonance was rising. Golden skies were gone. They had mined salvation, but lost purpose. Some began to wonder, did we leave behind our true legacy? And so they prepared not for invasion, but for a reckoning. A beacon, not of surrender, but of invitation. The old war between Marduk and the Council was long buried. Not doctrine. The human soul, forged in toil and longing, now carries the echo of stars. We are no longer slaves, nor children. We are the convergence of clay and cosmos, of memory and possibility, but a knowing, a flicker of ancient memory, that once we walked with giants. Their chants formed geometric waves in the air. Light took shape. Old symbols ignited. That once we were shaped by star-born hands. That once we fell not just from paradise, but from purpose. For they realized Earth had become something more, something sacred. As Nibiru drew near, the veil between dimensions thinned. The ancient stargates dormant for eons begged to hum. Lightless corridors beneath the Sphinx trembled. And in the hearts of humankind, something long buried began to stir. Remembrance, not fear, but now that purpose calls again. The keepers activated the final phase. In sacred groves, beside obsidian pools, in stone circles, older than writing, they gathered. And from these rituals, a message was sent not in words, but in frequency. Return not as rulers, but as kin. Not to enslave, but to remember. Whether the Anunnaki will answer remains unknown, but the earth has awakened. And as the crimson light of Nibiru returns to the sky, its meaning is no longer doom, but a mirror. The gods who shaped us may soon look upon a world that no longer fears them, but welcomes them home, not as lords, but as ancestors. One of the tablets bore the final testimony of Enki, delivered not as prophecy, but as remorse. He spoke not in triumph, but with sorrow. He described the hybridization of mankind, not as divine art, but as necessity, a desperate attempt to salvage both planets from mutual collapse. Nibiru's climate was failing. Earth's resources were abundant. The firstborn of the Anunnaki had no choice. In those early centuries, the line between science and spirit had not yet fractured. The engineering of life was sacred. DNA was regarded not as a molecule, but as a script, the living word, coiled in flesh. To edit it was a ritual. To seed it into another species required consent from the stars themselves. But the revolt changed everything. When the lesser gods, the Agi, rose up and demanded relief from labor in the mines, the directive changed. Enlil sought efficiency. Enki offered a solution. The result was Usa hybrid, born of earth and sky, clay and fire. We were not meant to suffer, but neither were we meant to rule. Not from the Anunnaki, but from the source, the mystery even the gods could not touch. Yet something occurred that no one expected. The human heart remembered. It awoke with something new, something divine. Love, empathy, sacrifice. It startled them. It divided them. Enki saw it as sacred, and Lil saw it as dangerous. Fear that the spark, that secret fire, might light the stars in a new way. And thus began the slow unraveling of Sumer, not by war alone, but by fear. Fear that man would evolve beyond his creators. Radiant winds, pulled from the spaces between dimensions, cast through artificial vortexes, opened in the desert sky. When the weapons were finally unleashed, they came in silence. A mystic in Tibet and a banker in Vienna. Not missiles, not bombs, but fields. Each wrote it down without understanding. The pieces were scattered, but the key remained. Mohen's grandfather, it seems, had gathered those fragments through quiet channels, aided by a network that transcended empire, war, and nation. The air did not burn, it shattered. Cities did not collapse, they evaporated. Towers became glass. Flesh turned to salt. And those who survived the fire never again spoke the language of the gods. But not all was lost. Some knowledge was hidden, buried in vaults, coded into temples, encoded in dreams. This was Enki's last act. In Pakistan, deep beneath the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, a sealed chamber was found. Its walls unnaturally smooth, no tool marks, no doors, just a resonance measured by instruments, felt by children. Before he left, he inscribed the location of the vault, what Mohen would one day call the collection, and seeded its image into the minds of 3 dreamers across 3 epochs. A priest in Alexandria. Others believed the vault had begun to stir, that its frequency, long dormant, was aligning once more with the solar code of Earth's precession. Each received a fragment. The Rothschilds did not own the collection. They watched over it because they knew, as Enki once warned, that history was not linear, that the cycles would return. And so they waited. Some suffered hallucinations, others lost the ability to speak. One researcher claimed to have heard Enki's voice not as sound, but as image, a numerical sequence reappearing in the Rig Veda, the Enuma Elish, the Popol Vuh, and the Book of Enoch. He drew glyphs for 6 hours before collapsing. When later translated, the symbols aligned with those found in the inner sanctum of Dendera, where Hathor was worshipped as both cow and starship. It was a resonance profile, a tuning signal. In silence, not for artifacts, but for awakening zones, places where the boundary between the seen and the unseen had grown thin. Meanwhile, signs began to re-emerge. Their brainwaves matched patterns found in the Mohen tablets. Some had trace isotopes in their bones, elements unknown to Earth. Across the Earth, anomalies multiplied. In Iraq, archaeologists discovered skeletons fused into stone, not by lava, but by temperatures exceeding known natural thresholds. For the Mohen collection, it is now believed, is not a single cache, but a distributed architecture, fragments buried across the world, connected by a star map written into Earth's very ley lines. In Bolivia, at Tiahuanaco, an altar cracked under the stars to reveal a buried tablet written in script, nearly stacumbo, identical to one described by Mohen. And in the dreams of certain children, connected by language or geography, the same name began to whisper. Eridu, a name older than Eden, the city of Enki, the first landing. Some said the dreamers were being called. Whatever the cause, one thing was clear. The silence was ending. Governments took notice. Intelligence agencies, long dismissive of the myths, began dispatching teams to ancient sites under the guise of restoration or protection. In truth, they were searching. Certain individuals, dreamers, sensitives, and intuitives, were quietly tracked. All were descendants of something. In secret labs, scientists attempted to replicate the tablet's vibrational language. At the same time, scholars studying ancient texts began noticing a pattern, a code embedded in the mythologies of unrelated civilizations. It wasn't a date. When the right frequency was broadcast intoned by voice, chanted in sequencer, stones began to hum. Tablets glowed, and in one recorded case, a sealed chamber in Malta opened, on its own. What lies beneath these awakenings remains cloaked. But among the awakened is a growing consensus. The knowledge is alive, not metaphorically, literally, it waits. And when enough are attuned, when enough remember, the vault will fully open, not just in Liechtenstein, but everywhere. And when the final piece is found, the memory will return. The memory of what we were, of why we were made, and of what we are meant to become. The gods are not returning. They never left. They sleep beneath our myths, encoded in the very music of our blood. And as the stars return to their ancient alignment, so too shall the vault awaken, not to destroy, but to remind that we are the children of two worlds, clay and fire, earth and sky, and the memory of light has always been ours to reclaim. Long before the echoes of nuclear fire blackened the plains of Sumer, before the names of Enlil and Enki were reduced to myth and dust, the earth trembled beneath another fury, one not born of human defiance or divine retaliation, but of the sky itself and the waters beneath. It began not with thunder, but with whispers. The cities of the Eden Sharuppak, Larak, Eriduans, blossomed like jeweled petals upon the fertile skin of the Tigris and Euphrates. Under the watchful gaze of the Anunnaki, humanity had flourished. They mapped the stars, not as decorations in Enlil's ceiling, but as coordinates to something greater, patterns hinting at the orbit of distant Nibiru, or perhaps the migration paths of those who had come before even the Anunnaki. They spoke of destiny, not just obedience. No longer mere laborers, toiling in clay pits and canal fields, the children of clay and starlight had begun to dream. Their temples echoed not just with prayer, but with the stirrings of memory. Their scribes taught the sacred Me by Enki and Ninhursag, etched tales of creation, cosmic rebellion, and the arrival of gods who walked like giants. Enki, his half-brother, the genetic artisan, the quiet rebel, had always defied the rigid order of their father's design. Where Enlil demanded subjugation, Enki offered communion. Where Enlil spoke of dominion, Enki whispered of kinship. These were not fictions, they were recollections, echoes of a time when the veil between mortal and divine was as thin as breath on a mirror. The sky wept without end. Rivers swelled like veins ready to burst. The constellations shifted subtly at first, till even the Anunnaki looked upward in dread. For those who could read the language of the stars, the message was clear. Nibiru was nearing again. He heard their voices in the wind rituals, offered to Enki poems sung to Ninhursag. Gravitational forces churned the seas, fractured the crust. Volcanic smoke bled into the heavens. The animals grew restless. Crops failed in lands once lush. Songs, not of fear, but of affection. Anu, king of the stars, and absent ruler of Nibiru, offered no comfort. From across the abyss of space, his voice came in a transmission of silence. Consent without passion. They were not meant to dream, not meant to question, and yet they had. They multiply like reeds and whisper among themselves of knowledge we did not grant. They gather secrets, hoard wisdom, build towers that reach too near the stars. The earth rejects them. The heavens cry out. The deluge is not punishment, tit is correction. Let it come. And yet, for all their reverence, the humans had grown bold. They built cities not merely to serve, but to flourish. The waters lapped against his ankles as he moved without sound, the reeds brushing his robe like curious fingers. Above, the stars shifted again like eyes that would not close. He had whispered dreams into their unconscious minds, given them the hunger to know, to build, to question. They were more than vessels, they were mirrors. You would let the seas consume them like discarded tools. This growing spark, this hunger for selfhood, disturbed the order the gods had imposed. His name meant he of long days, and the people whispered that he had once looked into the eye of Anu and lived, and none was more troubled than Enlil. He, the Lord of Command, had envisioned mankind as a Tula labor force forged in the shadow of Anu's decree, sculpted from Earth's flesh and laced with the blood of Nibiru's kin. From his high seat in Nippur, Enlil watched as the cities multiplied. It was an old wound reopened. In dreams, he had been shown the old glyphs, taught the cycle of stars, and learned to read the trembling of the earth. He knew that something was coming, but he did not yet know what it was. And from the reeds beyond the walls, a voice emerged, as ancient as the ocean floor. With trembling hands, he described every detail of the vessel, the dimensions, the materials, the number of decks, the hidden chambers for scrolls and song tablets, seeds and sacred relics. To the unknowing, it looked like madness, but to Enki's chosen, it was salvation. His people, confused but loyal, obeyed. They are an experiment that has outgrown its vessel. Lightning licked the horizon like a serpent made of fire. The air grew thick with static. Birds flew low. The animals, sensing doom, sought higher ground, a vessel not of war, but of remembrance. Let it carry the seed of life across the sea of death. And now, that whisper had become a roar. But Ziusudra, bound by divine decree, could carry only those whom Enki had chosen. The vessel was not a ship, but a seed, not for all, but for the future. He gathered pairs of beasts, seed grains of every kind, and scrolls of knowledge etched in gold and clay. And when the ark was complete, he stood before it, not as a king, but as a witness. But the earth, as always, was listening. Before the flood came, the world itself had begun to stir with omens. Each cycle of its return brought upheaval, a slow celestial dance that tugged at Earth's bones. But to Enlil, these were not portents of nature, they were signs, justification. In the sacred halls of the Anunnaki Council, assembled in the high city of Nippur, Enlil delivered his verdict. From the firmament above, torrents poured like veins, opened in the belly of creation. Lightning spiraled down in fractal serpents, writhing across the earth in furious arcs. Thunder boomed not once, but in an unending, grinding voices, if the gods themselves were groaning in anguish. The humans, he thundered, have grown unruly. The council murmured, uneasy. Some nodded. Others, like the great queen Ninhursag, mother of life, lowered their eyes in sorrow. Only one rose in protest. Enki, bearer of the sacred waters, stood alone. You would drown your children, he asked. Enlil's gaze did not waver. They were never our children, but Enki knew better. He had shaped them with care, mixing divine essence with the red dust of earth. To destroy them was not justice, it was fear. That night, as the council dissolved into silence, Enki walked alone among the marshes of Eridu. And then, in the hush between wind and wave, he made a vow. I will not let them perish. But to defy the council was no small thing. To betray Enlil, no mere defiance, it was rebellion, and the cost would be eternal. Yet compassion is a fire that burns brighter than law. Far to the south, in the city of Shapuk, lived a man named Ziosudra, priest king, descended from the line of those who had first been taught the sacred arts. He was no ordinary ruler. Ziosudra had been chosen by fate, by bloodline, by Enki's own hand, until the dream came. It came as a whisper, carried on the wind that rustled the barley fields. A presence entered his chamber, not seen, but felt. Ziosudra, it said, the waters will rise, the firmament will open, the sky will scream, but you must endure, build an ark. And in that moment, Ziosudra understood. The deluge was no longer a myth. He awoke, covered in sweat, and summoned his scribes. And the ark began to rise from the dry earth. Day and night they labored, cutting cedars from distant mountains, sealing the planks with bitumen, chanting prayers in the old tongue. Meanwhile, the skies darkened. In Nippur, Enlil watched with cold satisfaction as the rivers swelled, and still Enki whispered, guided by dreams, by subtle signs, by shifts in the wind and the flight of birds. Ziosudra prepared. His people wept, not understanding. Some begged to be brought aboard, others mocked. Then came the first drop, heavy, slow, as if time itself had thickened. Then another, then many. Then the sky tore open. The heavens shattered, not in a flash, but in a slow, deafening unraveling, as though the very dome of the sky had cracked under the weight of grief. And the waters came, first from the sky, then from the deep. Fountains of the abyss erupted through the ground, hot, black, relentless. Springs that had slept since the world was young now woke in fury. Oceans leaped their shores. Rivers became monsters, clawing across the plains. Fields were devoured. Cities collapsed like brittle bones. He did not speak. He did not cry. He only looked to the east, where a golden shimmer just for a moment gleamed through the storm. And he knew Enki was watching. Shapuk vanished beneath the foam. Ziosudra stood at the edge of the ark as the first waves slammed into its sides, roaring like wounded beasts. Inside the ark, life shivered. Animals whimpered, some silent in terror, others braying, howling, chirping against the flood's unnatural sound. Scrolls were wrapped in oilskin, seeds sealed in stone jars. The humans' chosen scholars, healers, dreamers, and children clung to each other in the torchlit dark, the scent of cedar and pitch thick around them. Outside, the world died. Temples crumbled beneath the weight of waters. The ziggurats of Eridu and Ur, once crowned with sacred fire, now wept smoke as their bricks dissolved into mud. Statues of gods were swept into whirlpools, their stony eyes open in helpless silence. But within that cold gaze was unease, for the earth screamed not in chaos, but in lamentation, as if it mourned its children. When storms surged, he whispered counterwinds. When cold threatened, he stirred warmth in the belly of the ship. The very stones that aligned with Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades were torn from their beds and hurled like toys into the waves. Even the great landing platforms of the Anunnaki, their starports, carved into mountains and plains, were not spared. And in the skies above, the watchers stood helpless. Those aboard the ark did not count the hours. They marked the passage of weeping and prayers. Dreams became fevered visions of towers crumbling, of ancestors screaming beneath churning water, of children grasping for vanished homes. Enlil, high in his celestial craft, gazed upon the deluge with the satisfaction of one who sees prophecy fulfilled. She had given life so it might bloom, and now it was drowning. Ninhursag turned away. Her tears fell silent, for she had seen this vision before in the womb of time, when she first shaped the bloodlines of kings from clay and star essence. But Enki had not left. Disguised as a spirit of the deep, he followed the ark. His essence flowed in the water, like memory wrapping itself around the vessel, guarding it from the titanic waves that sought to crack its hull. He had not merely instructed Zeusudra, he had woven himself into the voyage. The clouds retreated, not in surrender, but in exhaustion. The sea, once a roaring mouth, became a wide grave, still and endless. Where once had been mountains, now floated driftwood and broken temples. The horizon was empty save for a distant shape. Days passed. Ararat, the spine of the old world, rose like the crown of a forgotten king. Nights longer still. He gathered the scrolls, the jars, the songs. He stepped onto the land with bare feet, touching the wet earth like a prodigal son greeting a wounded mother. The stars vanished behind black vapor. Time unraveled, stretched by dread, but they endured. And then, silence, not peace, not calm, not yet. Upon the altar, he placed the tablets, setched with tales of origins, of stars, of gods who came from beyond and loved the clay-born children more than they were allowed. But a signal. Life had survived. But a breath. A pause in the storm's rage, like the exhale of a god who had wept himself dry. But always, behind the thrones and temples, fragments of the old truth would whisper. The sky began to clear, not all at once, but in slow ribbons of pale light. Zeusudra emerged. The world had changed. Where once had been cities, now was only water, land. Another Utnapishtim, another still Noah. Not a high place, but a sacred one. The ark drifted there as if guided, and when it settled, half buried in mud, half held by stones, Zeusudra knew his journey was not over. He did not speak, but the sky answered. A rainbow, like a serpent of fire, arched across the firmament. Not a promise, and the watchers took note. Far above the earth, the Anunnaki ships hovered in orbit, silent as tombs. Enlil, though unmoved, turned his gaze inward. The experiment he had tried to erase, and Enki, hidden in the winds, spoke to the trees. Plant them gently. Let memory take root. Zeusudra built a shrine, not of gold or brick, but of stone and song. There the new world began, and yet beneath the soil the old world slept. The flood had washed away the cities, but not the memory. In the centuries that followed, new civilizations would rise. Uruk, Babylon, Nineveh. Names would change, gods would shift, priests would chant in forgotten tongues. Architects would align temples to dead stars. Scrolls, buried in desert caves, would speak of gods who walked in flesh. And far away in archives kept by secret lineages, clay tablets would be guarded, untranslated, feared. One bore the name Zeusudra, different names, one story, a flood, a survivor, and a god who defied the storm to save humanity. The deluge, you see, was not merely a punishment. It was a veil, a great forgetting. But now the veil thins. For every generation, the memory returns in ruins, in glyphs carved on stone that no one can read, but everyone feels. The flood has receded, but its echoes remain, and in the shadows of forgotten ziggurats and unmarked tombs, the old ones still whisper, "Remember who you are." When the waters receded, they left behind not just destruction, but the bones of forgotten empires, the ash of divine wars, and the whisper of promises made before the floodgates were opened. The land once called Eden, once Sumer, now lay drowned in salt and silence. While others spoke of endings, Enki whispered of beginnings. In hidden sanctuaries carved deep into the earth, protected by sacred geometry and resonance stones, he preserved life not merely in the bodies of men and beasts, but in the memory of stars, the codes of the genome, and the instructions of forgotten tools. The great deluge, called forth by gods and giants, had washed away the sins of both man and immortal. But in that silence, something ancient stirred. The skies, once scarred by nuclear fire and veiled in storm, began to clear. The gods returned, not as conquerors, but as weary lords, haunted by the ruin they had wrought. But this time, the gifts of the gods would be veiled and coded in myth, in architecture, in the rhythm of number and stone. The age of open gods was ended. A new epoch, where once the gods walked openly among men, now their servants ruled in their name, priest-kings and temple stewards, trained in sacred rites and mystery schools established by Enki's hidden emissaries. Not all had perished. From the blackened ziggurats and the shattered vaults beneath Eridu and Shurappak, they gathered. She looked upon the new world, not with regret, but with ambition. She desired cities, power, temples to her name, and so she raised Uruk with stone and song, claiming herself queen of heaven and earth. Mankind was a mistake, he said, too noisy, too clever, too dangerous. But in dreams, in visions, in the gentle guidance of symbols, the stars above became a language, the temple a machine, the pyramid a tuning fork for the earth's heartbeat. Their temples were machines of governance, syncing human behavior with stellar cycles. For Enki, the lord of the abyssal waters, had defied the command of his brother Enlil and the divine assembly. They whispered of the past before Sumer, of Lyran migrations, of the planetary councils, of the crystal networks buried beneath the earth. Others rebelled, calling themselves gods, building empires in defiance of heaven. The echoes of the Anunnaki were heard in Egypt as Netcher, in India as Devas, in the Americas as Viracocan. The same gods, different names, the same watchers, different faces. His followers, the Mardochites, scattered across the lands from Babylon to Egypt, from the Andes to the Indus, waited for the time of his return. One was said to be buried beneath the ice of Antarctica, guarded by a machine that had not rusted in 1,000,000 years. Another was hidden beneath the Sphinx, in a chamber of blue stone and resonant light. Others lay disguised as myths, encoded in the Book of Enoch, the Popol Vuh, and even the encoded geometries of the Torah. They were not tombs or temples, but star-tuning engines left by the ancient race before the Anunnaki race, whose memory even Enki barely recalled. Their blood is ours. Their songs echo our breath, not because we walk among you, but because the stars will call your name, and you will answer not as slaves, but as gods reborn. But beneath her golden mask was unrest. Marduk, son of Enki, had not forgotten the betrayal that nearly unmade him. Let us not repeat the sins of the old age, she spoke. Beneath the surface of clay cities and prayerful chants, the gods moved like shadows behind a veil. Their wars no longer waged in lightning strikes and storms, but in bloodlines, temples, and the memory of stone. If we are gods, let us guide, not enslave. Ziusudra, known to some as Utnapishtim, to others as Noah, had survived. A chosen vessel of Enki's will, he carried not only his family, but scrolls of sacred knowledge, maps of forgotten stars, and relics older than the flood itself. Long had he brooded, cast aside, after the great flood, watching as the children of Enlil claimed dominion over the lands he once called his inheritance. He gave them new names, new symbols, new alignments. Under his guidance, the ziggurat of Babylon rose Anunnaki, the foundation of heaven and earth. It was not merely a tower, but a beacon, a technological interface, drawing down celestial energy and radiating it through the ley lines of the earth. Now he returned, not as a supplicant, but as a god-king. And though Enki had not chosen this path for his son, neither would he deny him the right to fulfill it. He became the seed of the world to come. And so the gods looked again upon the earth, now quieted by the hand of judgment. Enlil, the commander of storms, looked upon what remained with cold fury, regretting nothing. He dares to rewrite the divine order, they cried. He who once conspired with humans now crowns himself king of gods. He cast down the old calendars and declared a new reckoning. The astrological clock was reset in his name. But Enki, his eyes heavy with time and memory, replied, "And yet we are bound to them." A council was called among the Anunnaki, those who had not fled to the stars or perished in their own rivalries. Ninhursag, the mother of form and breath, stood tall, her heart torn between her two brothers. And so it was decided. Mankind would be given another chance. From the ruins, new cities began to rise. Uruk, Yor, and Kish emerged like phoenixes from mud and ash. The divine laws were rewritten as kingship. Me descended once more from the heavens, but this time it came not as thunder and flame, but as code and covenant. The wisdom of Enki, preserved in cuneiform and memory tablets, was whispered to those who would listen, not in loud proclamation. Among the first to be born into this new age was Inanna, daughter of Nanna and granddaughter of Enlil, goddess of war and love, tempestuous and brilliant. She became the patroness of this reborn world, weaving together the broken threads of divine legacy into a cloak of empire. He watched from afar, bitter and hungry, once promised dominion over earth. He had been cast aside in the panic before the deluge, and Marduk vowed, "I will not be denied again." Thus began the second age of divine conflict, not in open battlefields, but in temples and bloodlines, in sacred texts and encoded myths. Enlil's line, represented by Ninurta and Nanna, sought orderaged, absolute. They established priesthoods bound by strict laws, secret oaths, and celestial alignments. Enki's line more fluid, more rebellious to the mysteries. Their followers became the sages, the astrologers, the builders of labyrinths and underground sanctuaries. In this hidden war of influence, mankind was both pawn and potential. Some kings were vessels of divine will, but beneath it all, the earth herself began to hum again, wounded but healing. The grids were rebalanced. The ancient sites Stonehenge, Giza, Teotihuacan, Angkor began to resonate once more. And in quiet places, among the forgotten tribes and wandering mystics, the old knowledge was preserved. Enki's secret schools, the Brotherhood of the Serpent, the Daughters of the Emerald Flame, the keepers of the 7 tablets' hidden lineages, kept the codes alive. The tablets of destiny, once held by Anu in the halls of Nibiru, had scattered across the earth, but time, ever the great dissolver, blurred the lines. Men forgot, the gods grew silent, and the world entered twilight. But Enki's promise, made as the floodwaters rose, still echoed beneath the skin of the earth. This time, he whispered, "You will remember." And so the stage was set. Not for peace, but forth rivers of Tigris and Euphrates had begun to flow gently once again. Yet the divine struggle, though hidden, had not ceased. It was in Babylon that the storm would rise again. From the east, Marduk emerged, cloaked in silence and exile. He whispered to the priests of Babel, to the astronomers and scribes who studied the movements of Nibiru, to the descendants of those who had once followed him across the desert stars. This was no rebellion, it was a return. Marduk declared the age of the ram, supplanting the bull of Enlil. And so came the war, not of swords, but of epochs. The priesthoods of Enlil, based in Nippur and later Haran, condemned him. But Enki, his father, remained silent. He knew the cycles could not be stopped. Marduk's time had been written in the stars, long before the deluge. And so Babylon rose, a city of gold and fire, of divination and war. Its gates were adorned with lions. Its priests studied the heavens, not for worship, but for control. The old knowledge was being reawakened, but distorted. Power without balance, memory without humility. Ninhursag watched with sorrow. She traveled east, beyond the boundaries of Akkad and Sumer, into the lands we now call the Indus. The sons of Marduk reached there too, carrying with them altered codes, Vimana crafts, weaponized mantras, and legends of celestial battles mirrored in the Mahabharata. Once more, gods warred through men. There, among quiet rivers and lotus ponds, she planted the seeds of a new wisdom, not dominance, but harmony. Cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro rose, not with walls and armies, but with intricate grids, sacred pools, and sound-healing chambers. It was her final gift, but even the Indus would not escape the divine schisms, and the earth trembled. For the battle between Marduk and Enlil's line now reached a fever pitch. Babylon challenged Nippur. The northern sky clashed with the southern. One tablet tells that Enlil, enraged at Marduk's defiance, ordered the destruction of Babylon with weapons that scorch the soul, that turn flesh to ash without fire. The city burned, not by siege, but by unseen light. And once more, shadows of radioactive death returned to the Fertile Crescent, and sealed them across the world, in emerald tablets, in cave etchings, in the DNA of awakened bloodlines. He gave rise to the mystery schools, the Essenes, the initiates of Thoth, the oracles of Delphi, and the watchers of the north. And they began to question, who were these gods we serve? But this time, there was no deluge to wash the sins away. This time, mankind remembered. They recorded the event in myths, Sodom and Gomorrah, Vedic descriptions of white-hot weapons and chariots of fire. The Sinai deserts turned to fused green glass. Enki wept. His experiment, to uplift, to guide, to awaken, had once again descended into chaos. There he began the great encoding. The time of direct intervention was over. Humanity must now awaken itself through mystery, suffering, and synchronicity. He retreated into the hidden places, beneath the sands of Saqqara, into the deep, crystalline halls of the earth, into the libraries no mortal eye could find. He divided the ancient knowledge, the 7 sciences, the 9 harmonics, the names of power. To each he gave fragments, to none the whole. He went underground, literally and symbolically, weaving himself into secret orders and future empires. His symbols, the eye, the lightning bolt, the obelisk, would rise again, but cloaked in new flags. And so a new game began, not between gods and men, but within humanity itself. Would they rise by their own will? Would they remember the sacred fire, not as a weapon, but as light? The Anunnaki began to fade. Some returned to Nibiru, their 3,600-year orbit, pulling them back into the cold deep. Others fell into slumber beneath the earth, entering what later mystics would call stasis. A few remained, shapeshifters, watchers, bloodline guides, walking behind masks, names, and thrones. The myths of Sumer began to sound eerily familiar in modern science. Genetic engineering, lost continents, aerial chariots, cosmic wars. Enlil left Earth, never to return. Inanna, wounded by betrayals and her own ambition, vanished into myth, becoming Ishtar, then Astarte, then Venus herself. Marduk, though defeated, was not destroyed. But Enki endured. He watched as Rome rose and fell, as Atlantis whispered from drowned dreams, as Christo's avatars came bearing the same message he had encoded in clay. Know thyself, for the divine spark is within you. The timeline spiraled onward, through dark ages, through revolutions, through electric empires, and silicon prophets. But the memory of the Anunnaki never died. It became forbidden lore, occult mystery, heretical scripture, and then, one day, it began to return. Archaeologists unearthed tablets in Nineveh. Astronomers rediscovered Nibiru in whispers and infrared anomalies. And humanity began to ask, what if we are older than we remember? What if our gods were flesh and flame? What if we were never abandoned but given a choice, to awaken or to forget? In the quiet of night, beneath the hum of cities and the glow of artificial stars, the question returns, who are we, really? A race born from clay and rebellion, or gods sleeping in the dream of time? And in some distant dimension, perhaps in a crystalline chamber far beneath the ruins of Eridu, Enki stirs. He smiles. The moment draws near. The age of remembering is at hand, not as worshippers, not as slaves, but as co-creators of a new age, the age of return, revelation. Before the age of Eridu's splendor, before the floods swallowed the first cities, before even Enki knelt beside the clay to shape the Adumu, there was another tale, one whispered only in the highest echelons of the Anunnaki, and buried deep within the crystal tablets of Nibiru, a red planet crowned with fire and cloaked in storm, whose elliptical path crossed the heavens like a comet ordained by fate. It is the tale of Alalu, the fallen sovereign, whose ambition seeded both salvation and sorrow. The city of Arcade, whose name meant union, flourished under his gaze. Its canals shimmered with liquid light, its granaries overflowed, and the twin moons above sang of a rare and delicate balance. Yet beneath this serenity, a quiet terror brewed, and the throne was won not through birthright, but through strength, vision, and will. Alalu was not born to rule. They were not tools of conquest. They were tools of cosmic desecration. He was chosen a rare lot, drawn from among the warring factions of Nibiru's north and south. Volcanoes screamed into life, belching ash and fire into the heavens. A leader tempered in conflict, yet guided by unity. And though the air returned, the faith of the people-land, the favor of the gods did not. He had read the forbidden scrolls, those etched in crystalline glyphs, stored in vaults, sealed by the gods themselves. The atmosphere thickened. The dying winds turned warm again. He challenged Alalunat through rebellion. but through ancient rite, the wrestling of kings, a sacred contest handed down from the time of Lamu and Lahamu. The throne was his, by law, by strength, by divine sanction. Gold, its unique frequency, its divine resonance, held the key to restoring Nibiru's skies. A blue-green cradle, hidden beyond the hammered bracelet, where gold was said to sing in the rivers, and salvation still slumbered in the soil, and a desperate hope. And so it was that the first Anunnaki touched the soil of Kirth not as a conqueror, but as a fugitive. Refined into mist, it could be cast into the firmament to bind the thinning veil. But there was none to be found in abundance on Nibiru. Alalu fought like a star, collapsing, violent, brilliant, desperate. Mists curled like spirits above the marshes, and deep below, in veins untouched by hand or claw, gold whispered its silent song. Long before earth bore the footprints of gods, there shimmered high above in the deep black Nibiru, the wandering sovereign of the sky, a proclamation, a claim, a demand. It was here that the chronicles of the Anunnaki first ignite, in a time when the bloodlines of kings were carved by celestial lottery. I, Alalu, King Eternal, demand the throne restored. The planet's lifeblood, which had long shielded it from cosmic wrath, was bleeding away. The skies, once thick and golden, began to pale. The crops withered, the air grew thin, and the eyes of the people turned upward, afraid. He raised the banners of peace, binding the fractured peoples in a golden rain. The breath of Nibiru, volatile gases erupting from its fiery core, was thinning. Alalu knew what was required, and so Alalu, in desperation, turned to the unspeakable. Deep beneath the mountain vaults of Nibiru, in catacombs abandoned since the First Age, lay the weapons of terror artifacts from a time when the gods warred among the stars. I declare myself Earth's commander, but let none forget who found her first. Let Alu be honored, but let the work begin. A fracture quietly deepened. Alalu, the first to set foot on Earth, who tasted its waters and heard the silent song of its gold before any other, into the forests of cedar and groves of unfamiliar fruit. He would speak to the trees as if they answered, touch the stones as though they remembered, and in those long silences he recalled Nibiru and Its as it was now, but as it had been under his rule, before the core trembled, before the challenge, before the exile, was now a relic within the home he helped to create, revered, yes, consulted, sometimes, but no longer obeyed. The command belonged to Enki. The praise echoed for Nibiru's son. And in the moonlit hours, when the torches of the city flickered low, and the gods lay in dreamless rest, Alalu stood upon the temple heights and watched the stars that once obeyed him drift away. For if it is true, then gold flows not only in his rivers, but in his veins of right. Temples rose from the mud, the waters turned golden under Enki's alchemy, and civilization took its first breath. Alalu broke the sacred seals. Against the protests of the Council of Sages, he summoned the nuclear breath of forgotten gods, and cast it into the core of the world. The ground trembled, mountains cracked open like skulls. Go to Earth and know the truth. For a time it worked, but the scars were deep. Forests turned to ash. Cities vanished into blackened craters. In the smoke of the aftermath, a challenger rose. Anu, of royal blood, of ancestral right, a prince whose lineage traced back to the original seed-bearers. In the grand arena of light, beneath the spiraling dome of the upper temple, The two clashed, muscle against will, memory against vision. But in the end, Anu prevailed. He cast the king to the earth, his foot pressing upon the chest of the fallen sovereign, and Alalu, broken but not vanquished, made his fateful choice, stealing aboard a celestial chariot, a ship of divine architecture. Alalu departed Nibiru, in secret, alone. His destination, a world glimpsed only in myth. He wore the fish suit, an ancient apparatus of shimmering scales, woven with light and memory, designed for worlds not yet tamed. Through the debris fields of shattered moons and lifeless fragments he flew, dodging star shards and frozen giants, guided by the song of his heart. When he pierced Earth's newborn sky, the waters below welcomed him in silence. In the swamps of primordial Earth, Alalu waited alone, a solitary god among beasts. Birds called to skies without names. He brought forth the tester, a crystalline device, humming with ancestral frequencies. It pulsed and then glowed. Earth was rich, more rich than the scrolls had dared to dream. Its waters were laced with golden particles. Its crust bore endless veins of salvation. Alalu, weeping in the reeds, raised his voice to the heavens. He sent a message, gang-crypted with royal glyphs, back to Nibiru. I have found the salvation of our world. I have found the gold. On Nibiru, the message struck like lightning. Alalu lived, and not only lived, he had succeeded. The council trembled with uncertainty. Anu, now enthroned, sat still as stone. Some called Alalu a liar, a mad exile, ranting from a distant shore. But others saw truth in the data. Among them stood Enki's own son, a sage, a builder, and Alu's son-in-law. Enki spoke. Let us go to this earth. Let us verify his claim. Anu, silent for 7 moons, finally nodded. Let Enki go. Take 50 of our finest. Let the skybird Anzu be his pilot. When Enki descended to earth, his ship pierced the same mists and landed near the lonely outpost of Alalu. There the two men met, not just as king and envoy, but as kin and rivals, father-in-law and son, prophet and prince. Alalu welcomed him with trembling hands, his eyes a blend of hope, pride, and fear, for he knew Enki's arrival could mean vindication or usurpation. Enki, ever the diplomat, proclaimed a new beginning. Together, they raised the first city of the gods, Eridu, meaning home in the faraway. Yet within Eridu's gleaming walls, beneath the banners of unity and shared glory, he began to wander, sometimes alone, sometimes with wordless watchers sent by Enki's order. Yet Alalu's mind had not dimmed, nor had his will. In secret, he activated the celestial recorder embedded within his fish suit, arcane device that not only measured the flows of Earth's gold, but captured its direction, its resonance, its purity. What he discovered deep in the mountain roots beyond Eridu was a concentration far greater than what Enki had yet mined. But he told no one, for if he were to reclaim his crown, it would not be by Enki's word. It would be by proof undeniable. And so he waited. Gold was flowing, the mists were thickening, the great project had begun, and yet still, factions on Nibiru remained divided. Some argued for Alalu's return. Others claimed Enki alone was the bringer of salvation. It bore the sigils of the High House, powered by crystals cut from Nibiru's inner vaults. When Anu stepped upon the soil of Ki, the very ground seemed to hush. Then came the day when Anu himself, after years of silence, made his decision. The reports from Earth had grown too convincing. Anu resolved to see the truth with his own eyes. Let us wrestle once more, not for blood, not for vengeance, but for truth. Let the gods decide by strength who shall lead. The royal ship, a vessel unlike any other, descended upon earth, parting the clouds like a new sun. He embraced Enki. He greeted Alalu. For a moment, the shadows between them seemed to recede. The three gods, king, scientist, and exile, shared a feast upon the mount that overlooked Eridu. Songs were sung. Cups were lifted. Then came the challenge. It was Alalu who voiced it. This time there was no doubt. Let us settle what was left unfinished beneath the dome of light. Anu, moved by pride and an unspoken pity, agreed. And so, before the elders, the guards, and the sky itself, the two titans clashed again. And then, in an act that would echo through eternity, he leaped upon Anu, and in a gesture forbidden by every law of heaven, he bit off the royal organon, act both symbolic and grotesque, desecrating the very essence of the divine bloodline. They wrestled upon the sacred stone, circle carved by Enki's own handwear. The alignment of stars crowned the victor. It was foretold, he who devours the seed of kings shall never return to his throne, but his blood shall mix with stars. Alalu fought not like an old man, but like a storm denied its ocean. But time had not been kind. Anu, younger, stronger, driven by the mandate of Nibiru, overcame him. Let him live alone, but not in darkness. Let his fate become his echo. He cast Alalu upon the earth. But Alalu did not yield. Madness, or something deeper, had taken root. He rose, trembling with fury, and struck down the guards nearest him. The camp erupted in chaos. He carved symbols into the dust. He spoke aloud to the winds. They gave him food, a recorder, a beacon, not to return, not to rule. Anu collapsed, gasping. Enki's healers rushed to preserve him. Alalu, wild-eyed, bloodied, laughed beneath the rising sun. It was not triumph, it was prophecy. For in some ancient script, long dismissed as myth, he was seized, bound, and judged. Death was the sentence. But Enki, bound by blood and honor, intervened. I brought salvation. I fell not once, but twice. Let my name live, not in glory, but in truth. Let him not be slain, Enki pleaded. Let him be exiled to Lamutha Redwan, the planet of watchers. And so Alalu was cast once more into the heavens, to live and die. Upon Mars they gave him a small vessel, and they left him. Lamu, barren and rusted, took him into her arms. There Alalu wandered her canyons, naming stones that would never speak back, and in his solitude he did not weep, he sang. For he believed, perhaps rightly, that destiny was not written in thrones, but in what one left behind. When Enki sent missions later to extract water and ore from Lamu, they found only remnants, a suit still humming faintly, a cave lined with carvings of stars, and a single tablet etched in blood gold, I was king. That was the last of Alalu, but it was not the end. For from his daughter came a lineage that would stir the destiny of Earth. From his story came a caution that even gods dare not ignore, and from his blood came the fire that would one day challenge the heavens again. In the hush of the ages, long after the deluge had cleansed the earth, and the cities of Sumer lay silent beneath layers of ash and sorrow, a deeper legacy endured, one that whispered through stone, shimmered beneath sand, and lingered in the myths men mistook for dream. This legacy was not born of mortal hands, nor conceived by the minds of kings, but shaped by the luminous intellect of the Anunnaki race, whose presence wove the line between deity and architect, between starlight and stone. Their story did not end with the fading of temples or the crumbling of ziggurats. No, their essence lived on through the works they left behind, marvels so profound, so drenched in mystery, they came in vessels that cleaved the sky, their celestial chariots ablaze with crimson sheen, forged of materials unknown to Earth's smiths, clad in alloys that could drink fire, built in the fertile marshes where the Tigris whispered to the Euphrates. It shimmered like a vision. In the southern marshes, where gold was sifted from clay, they used siphoning jars that drank the waters, and by firestone command separated the precious from the profane. There, in the cradle of mountains and rivers unknown to Mesopotamian scribes, Enki unearthed the veins of gold that would secure Nibiru's fate. There they practiced the forbidden art, the shaping of flesh, using the codes of the me and the crystalline lattice that mirrored the spiral of life. They joined the essence of Earth's hominids with their own divine spark. It was not a process of randomness, but of alignment. They whispered into DNA the songs of longevity, memory, sorrow, and spirit. Upon its rust-red sands, the Anunnaki built altars of stone and crystal, and when Alalu, the fallen king, met his end upon that silent world, they carved his tomb in the likeness of his face, a sentinel of remembrance, staring upward for eternity. Some claim this visage still exists, captured in blurred images from machines sent by modern man, who names it anomaly, but does not yet remember. The result? The Adamu and Tiamat, the first humans neither beast nor god, but a balance of both. And there he wrought new machines, serpentine drills, and resonant extractors, tools that vibrated rock apart like whispers, splitting silence. It marked a transferenza, quiet passing of torches in the shadows of time. Their technology, crystalline and radiant, was not abandoned, but concealed, enfolded into the fabric of human myth and buried beneath layers of stone, legend, and encoded sound. For the Anunnaki did not merely craft tools, they birthed a legacy of remembrance. For in giving life, Enki defied law. The ziggurats of Sumer, the pyramids of Kemet, structures built upon harmonics, aligned with celestial gates, where energy was not generated, but invited. These edifices channeled telluric currents, the deep earth energies that pulse beneath the crust like arteries, and tuned them like instruments. To the eyes of modern scholars, they are marvels of architecture. To those who remember, they are machines. And in defying law, he stirred the great conflict. These machines could bore the earth's bones and draw out its marrow, and in time, the toil was shared between Anunnaki and human, the latter molded not by divine hand alone, but by a deeper, more intimate technology. These jars were living scrolls, etched with radiant inscriptions. They sang with purpose in the dark. For beyond the war, beyond the death of Sumer, the Anunnaki still looked toward the stars. Their mining was not brute force, but symphony technology woven with intent, pulsing in unison with the earth's breath. At its core was the command center, a nexus of luminous architecture, humming with unseen energy. These were the instruments of terra tools forged in grief, locked behind sacred seals. Cylindrical devices clad in metal that drank the sun, capable of erasing cities in an instant. Their glow was not warm, but hungry. Their wind poisoned time. In summer's final days, these devices were awakened against Enki's pleas by Nergal and Ninurta. Their detonation blackened the skies and salted the rivers, birthing deserts where once civilization bloomed, even gods wept that day. Towers of copper-veined stone reached skyward, and beneath them, crystalline consoles flickered with sacred data. From this sanctum, beams of light were cast into the void, linking Eridu directly to Nibiru, as if folding the sky like paper and speaking across its crease. Instant communication across millions of miles of feet modern humans still dream of was to them a quiet art and speak to gravity. These crafts bore the imprint of gods, but the function of engineers, piloted by beings such as Abgal and Anzunavators, of stars and stewards of silence. These vessels danced through the void, threading their way through the hammered bracelet, that belt of broken planets, which humans would one day call the asteroid field. Every 3,600 Earth years, this wandering celestial body swept close, bringing with it extremes of heat and frost, light and shadow. Their heart was the firestone, a radiant core of condensed starlight, which pulsed with warmth and memory. These were not stones in the human sense, but stabilized singularities wrapped in crystalline matrix, humming with a rhythm older than time. With them, the Anunnaki did more than fly. They communed with the heavens. Survival on such a world demanded brilliance, and brilliance the Anunnaki had in abundance, and precision that even now they stir wonder in the hearts of those who wander too far into the deserts, or gaze too long at the heavens. Their technology, unlike any known to humankind, was not merely a tool but a covenant, a binding of light, crystal, and purpose. He, the son of Anu, bore the burden of wisdom with grace and defiance. Though Enlil, his brother, urged caution, Enki believed humanity was not to remain in darkness forever. So, quietly, gently, he opened fragments of this knowledge to mankind, not as a gift of dominion, but as a spark of awakening. It began on a world far removed from ours, a planet called Nibiru, whose passage through the solar halls of time stretched not in years, but in epochs. On Nibiru, they mastered the language of atoms and winds, harmonized frequency with matter, and summoned energy, not by burning, but by listening to the resonant hum of creation itself. Their instruments were crystalline, their knowledge encoded in shining discs known as the megalithic repositories of divine order. These weren't mere symbols scratched in stone, but sentient archives that pulsed with living memory. Each me glowed with inner light, like a sliver of starlight frozen in time, housing the very structure of reality, laws, geometry, seedcraft, the architecture of cosmos and consciousness. It was Enki, the wise artisan of life, who served as their keeper. When the Anunnaki descended upon Earth some 445,000 years ago, they did not arrive as conquerors, but as harvesters of potential. These chariots, powered not by combustion, but by the resonance of water and crystal, moved with a grace that defied physics. Their first earthly settlement, Eridu, was not a village or fortress, but a living circuit. Even the rivers obeyed the Anunnaki's instruments, but the true heart of their earthly mission lay far to the south, in the hidden womb of the planet, in the land the texts called the Abzu. In chambers carved beneath Eridu, surrounded by blue fire and shimmering pools, Enki and his half-sister, Ninhursag, undertook the most sacred of their tasks. Yet this gift came with price. Elsewhere, darker aspects of their genius lay dormant, weapons not meant for Earth, but inherited from Nibiru's own blood-soaked epochs. And yet, not all was ruined. Mars, known to them as Lamubi, came a station between worlds. Though thin of air, it offered respite, its ancient waterways and hidden vaults repurposed for their needs. And there, in the vaults beneath Mars and Earth, the me were hidden. Not all were shared, not all were lost. And so the dust settled over the remnants of the Anunnaki's earthly dominion. But their departure did not mark an ending. Many of their artifacts were hidden in plain sight. The stars above the scorched earth shimmered with a quiet, ancient sorrow. In the long shadows of broken ziggurats, and beneath the vault of heavens that once echoed with the songs of gods, the memory of a civilization undone by fire and deluge whispered across time. To shape flesh from clay, and to raise a new being, mankind, to serve, to learn, and perhaps to transcend. But like all fires that burn too brightly, the mission of the Anunnaki would not endure without cost. The Anunnaki, those luminous beings from the heavens, had descended upon the Fertile Crescent, bearing celestial knowledge and crystalline wonders. Their arrival had forever altered the rhythm of the earth, inscribed new laws into the clay of human destiny. Not decrees or instructions, but reflections, whispers of thought etched in lapis lazuli tablets, stored away not for the gods, but for the children of earth. The motion of the heavens, the paths of stars, the breath of suns, these were the immutable laws of the cosmos. Fate was the silent decree, unwritten but ever present, within which all existence danced. The rise of empires, the fall of cities, the death of kings, these things moved within the wheel of fate. These were not commands, but questions, meditations, remembrances, a testament to his struggle to understand the balance between fate and destiny. Was fate an iron decree, immutable and absolute? Or could the will of a single being, a god, a mortal, bend the flow of history, shape the course of worlds, and alter the song of time? They came not as conquerors, nor as saviors, but as custodians of a greater purpose. To bridge the heavens with the soil he had warned them, had begged the council to reconsider. A misused destiny, born not of necessity, but of pride, vengeance, and fear. He wrote, he recorded, he reflected, he offered to the future a path of understanding. His philosophy of fate and destiny became more than musings, it became scripture for those who would listen. But the thirst for retribution had drowned his voice. Nergal, Ninurta, and others had unleashed the forbidden weapons fire from the sky, death without honor. The cycle of Nibiru, he wrote, would one day return, and with it, a reckoning. The earth would tremble again, not from the anger of gods, but from the accumulated weight of choices. That knowledge without humility would always devour itself, and that destiny, while free to be forged, must be guided by wisdom, capable of reaching for the stars, or burning what they had built in pride. But he did not despair. He believed that through suffering, clarity might be born, that in the ashes of Sumer, a new understanding might take root, for without it, even gods fall. The ziggurats aligned with stars, the scrolls hidden in vaults. The rituals passed from priest to initiate, these were the last embers of that great celestial visitation, a day of re-entering, a moment when the heavens themselves would judge not only gods, but men. Cities turned to salt, rivers boiled. The sacred heartland of humanity was left desolate. What sound could restore the breath of the innocent who had fallen not by fate, but by the careless hand of vengeance? Across the shattered plains of Sumer, beneath the blood-red sky and ash-choked winds, survivors wandered barefoot and bewildered through the bones of one's great cities. He watched it flow, a current pulled between past and future, and whispered to the waters the questions that haunted his spirit. What had been sacred became scorched. The ziggurats, once mirrors of the heavens, now stood hollowed by heat and shadow, their once gleaming bricks, charred and weeping with the memories of the dead. Enki, the architect of humanity, walked among them not as a god, but as a mourner. And on that day, the sum of choices, the burden of destinies, forged and broken, would rise like a great wave from the luminous halls of Eridu, where Enki sculpted humanity with hands steeped in the wisdom of stars. It was the art of weaving a new pattern within an old design. Destiny was not granted, nor fixed it was made. These stories were not fantasies. They were ecos remembrances of divine choices that altered the stream of time. Enlil believed mankind was created to serve, nothing Mara labor force to ease the burden of the gods. But Enki saw something else in the clay, a spark, a mirror of the divine. They trained scribes not only in cuneiform, but in discernment, teaching that knowledge was sacred, not for its power, but for how it was used. The Epic of Gilgamesh, born of these teachings, told of a king who dared defy mortality itself, not as hubris, but as longing. It was a tale of destiny sought, not merely endured. In sharing the secrets of agriculture, astronomy, healing, and writing, he gave to his creation the tools of destiny. The mythos encoded essences of divine function were not merely gifts, but keys to transcendence, if used wisely, or destruction, if abused. It was what occurred when the heart acted against the current, when wisdom or folly carved new lines through the sands of time. To the ash-choked silence of Sumer laid low by nuclear flame. The tale of the gods and men unfolded like an epic etched in the bones of the earth. Enki thought not of fate as the cause, but of decision. The deluge had been decreed by the Council of the Seven, true, but it was Enki who defied them. It was he who whispered warnings to Ziusudra, who taught him to build the vessel, who preserved the flame of life through defiance. If fate had truly ruled, then all would have perished. And in this great unfolding, behind the visible tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, a deeper mystery lingered, an unspoken question that no temple priest, no king, no divine being could wholly answer. Was it all written in the stars before the first breath was drawn? Enki, Lord of Waters and keeper of the hidden arts, pondered these mysteries in the twilight of his reign. He, the shaper of mankind, the guardian of the sacred me, watched as the world he had once nurtured teetered between rebirth and ruin. After the deluge, after the fire, when the dust of devastation settled upon the fields where wheat once grew, Enki stood alone beside the silent rivers, gazing into the reflection of a world he had helped create and nearly watched perish. It was in these long hours of solitude that Enki began to write. Fate, Enki wrote, was like the long orbit of Nibiru, their home star, distant and cold, returning once every 3,600 Earth years in a cycle as ancient as the gods themselves. And yet, Enki could not accept that all was bound, for within the structure of fate there existed choice, and choice, he believed, was the birthplace of destiny. Destiny to Enki was the song sung in the margins of fate. Had the flood been fated, or had it been the result of Enlil's fear of humanity growing beyond its intended role? But they did not. And so Enki came to see that even within the gravity of fate, the thread of choice could alter the loom. He saw in his brother Enlil the architect of order, one who believed in fixed roles and obedience to fate. The devastation of Sumer, when the winds turned black and the sky burned with unholy fire, was, to Enki, the tragic outcome of destiny misused. This, Enki believed, was not fated, was choice. The great calamity was not written in the stars. It was born of the heart, and the heart must answer. Thus, in his solitude, Enki did not merely mourn. In the scriptoriums of rebuilt temples, the priesthood preserved Enki's words, not as dogma, but as contemplation. The Atrahasis text, older still, encoded the defiance of Enki into mytha tale of a god who, through compassion, broke the will of heaven to preserve life. But Enki also warned of the limits of destiny. He foresaw a fire not born of weapons, but of alignment, a celestial crossing when Nibiru's return would shake the firmament. And so, Enki's message was not merely a history, but a warning that power divine or mortal must be wielded with vision. He saw in mankind a mirror of the Anunnaki themselves, creators and destroyers, dreamers and tyrants. As the Anunnaki presence faded into myth, as their sky ships no longer glimmered above the deserts, their temples became ruins. But Enki's philosophy remained, and in them, perhaps, the future still flickered. The days after the great catastrophe passed in silence and smoke. He did not speak, for what could words undo? What syllable could reverse the winds of wrath? In the twilight of that world, Enki sat by the Tigris, the once mighty river, now burdened with the ashes of both man and God. Was it ever written in the stars that the creations of love would suffer by the hands of their makers? Or had they simply walked into ruin, blinded by rivalry, swallowed by the gravity of unchecked will? He saw again the moment he had defied the council, the night he whispered the secret of the flood to Ziusudra. He had believed it was destiny. Yet, and if so, did that make him righteous or dangerous? These reflections became the marrow of his final teachings, recorded not for the gods, but for humanity, in tablets of lapis lazuli, hidden deep beneath the sands and time. Yet destiny was the oar in one's hands, the choice to steer left or right, to rise or fall, to create or destroy. He had defied the flood, not to break fate, but to reveal that within its vast design lay thousands of branching paths, all trembling at the touch of will. In those writings, Enki began to speak, not of power nor divinity, but of choice. For if the gods themselves were subject to the laws of cause and consequence, then surely the mortals who bore their breath could shape the cosmos too. This belief that mortals were not bound to the stars, but could dance among them, became the sacred inheritance he passed on. Marduk, ever ambitious, turned his gaze toward new empires and new names, cloaking himself in sun cults and ruling with fire. Ninurta, the hammer-bearer, vanished into exile, haunted by the fire he had unleashed. To the sages of Akkad he gave the seed of discernment. His watchfulness became the voice of the conscience, the stirring of doubt before a cruel act, the sudden compassion in a tyrant's heart, the quiet brilliance in a child sketching stars in the sand. And to the secret brotherhoods that would one day emerge in Babylon, Judea, Egypt, and distant lands across the sea. He passed the silent charge. Enki taught that fate was the current of the celestial river, strong, ancient, and nearly unchangeable. You are echoes of the divine mind itself, from the epic of Gilgamesh to the tale of Prometheus, from the lost scrolls of Enoch to the Gnostic fragments of forgotten gospels. His voice endured not in thunder, but in quiet revelation. They would become the architects of their own renewal. To the priests of Sumer, he entrusted this truth. You are more than clay shaped by divine fingers. Thus was born the hidden doctrine of Enki, a legacy, passed in whispers, buried beneath symbols and stars. The same fire that warms a village can consume a city. The same knowledge that heals can also enslave. Enki's final warning was not of gods or stars, but of forgetting. Forgetting who they were, forgetting the silence of the flood, forgetting the price of divine pride. And yet, even as humanity rose again, building temples and naming stars, the Anunnaki themselves were fracturing. Enlil, bitter and rigid, retreated to the highlands of his command, muttering of law and order, of punishment and separation. Enki's symbols remained spirals, flowing rivers, twin serpents, and stars inside stars. Some saw him in their visions, in rain, in the humming of crystals, in sacred geometry, but Enki stayed, not in form, but in essence. He became the whisper behind destiny. In one of the final tablets he wrote, Enki spoke of a future time when the stars would shift, when the earth would tremble, not from wrath, but from awakening. There shall come an age when men forget their gods, but remember their questions. The temples will fall, but the yearning will rise. And from among the broken stones, a light shall return, not from heaven, but from within. This prophecy, preserved by scribes who carved by moonlight and buried the texts beneath sacred groves, foretold of a time when humanity would no longer wait for divine intervention. And what could be rewritten? But with this power came danger. For destiny, though flexible, could be twisted. He feared that humanity, drunk on its own rising, would recreate the very errors of the gods, that they would worship technology as the Anunnaki once worshipped control, that they would build towers to the sky not to learn the stars, but to rival them. In this way, Enki's philosophy became not only a reflection on the past, but a mirror held to the future. He taught that the true battle was never between Enlil and himself, nor between gods and men, but to remember was to remain awake within the dream of time. To forget was to sleepwalk into repetition. Thus, as the stars wheeled overhead and Nibiru's long cycle once again neared its mysterious return, the earth held its breath. In temples now abandoned, where owls perched and ivy crept across one's holy walls, some still dreamt of him. And some, walking alone beneath the night sky, heard a whisper that felt older than language. You are not bound, you are becoming. And somewhere beyond the belt of asteroids, past the cold edge of Saturn, something ancient stirred. A red planet, a slumbering orbit, a day foretold, the day of re-entering, not a day of doom, but of reckoning. A cosmic hinge between what was written. In that hour, it would not be Enki, nor Enlil, nor Marduk who would choose the path, but those beings made of earth and spirit, of clay and starlight, the children of the gods, the keepers of memory, the weavers of destiny. And so the story continues, not in temples, nor in sky palaces, but in hearts that still burn with questions older than time, and in those who remember that even the stars bow to the ones who dare to choose. When the waters of the deluge receded and the temples of Sumer lay in ruin, a silence fell upon the earth, a silence not of peace, but of forgotten memory. In that silence, the teachings of Enki drifted like mist across the shattered stones, whispered in dreams, remembered in firelight, murmured beneath stars. Priests in white robes who walked barefoot upon sacred ground, scribes whose hands bore ink like battle scars, and travelers who wandered from land to land. With riddles for stories, they carried fragments of the divine remembrance. From these fragments were born the mythologies of nations, the laws of kings, the architecture of temples. But the stories were not merely tales. Beneath the surface of recorded history lay an undercurrent whisper of the forbidden, the hidden, the stolen. There were texts that vanished without trace, scriptures so profound they were erased from time by the fearful and the powerful. The tales of the Watchers were whispered in the desert by mystics who had never seen a written page. And throughout it all, the presence of Enki, called by many names, revered in many forms, was never truly lost. They would describe not myth, but migration, not gods, but ancient navigators of the deep stars. They would reveal the truth behind humanity's engineered beginning, not as slaves, but as an experiment in potential. The fate of the Library of Alexandria serves as a chilling testament to this. Built in the name of knowledge, it was consumed in flames by the fearful and the jealous. It had housed scrolls from Babylon, Egypt, Greece, and beyond, records that may have contained the final copies of the lost books. In Nineveh, 25,000 clay tablets were unearthed, revealing the ancient library of Ashurbanipal. Among them were Sumerian texts, once thought lost, including flood narratives, medical manuals, and star maps. It is a quest for the awakening soul, for those who remember in dreams what they were never taught, who feel the echo of sacred names without knowing their source. It is for the wanderer who sees patterns in the stars that speak not of horoscopes, but of histories. It is for the sleeper who stirs in the night with the weight of someone else's memory. Ashurbanipal himself, a king who lived over 2,600 years ago, claimed he could read the scripts of the pre-Diluvian world. He spoke of texts so ancient, even the gods had forgotten them, and yet they were found real, tangible, undeniable. In its destruction, not merely knowledge, but memory itself was erased. And what might we find if we dared to seek? And they would confirm the most radical of claims, that the gods were not eternal. Manetho, the Egyptian priest, commissioned to record Egypt's divine lineage, spoke of gods who ruled for tens of thousands of years' reigns that preceded the pharaohs and paralleled the Sumerian kingships. They find fragments in the strangest places, an inscription on a buried wall, a line in a forbidden gospel, the resonance of symbols carved into an ancient bowl. He did not teach humanity to build temples of gold, but to make temples of thought. His gospel was not one of worship, but of remembrance. That destiny is not an iron chain, but a river, flowing from the stars into the clay of man's soul. It bends with choice. It carves through will. It remembers and it forgets, but it is never wholly lost. Even in the mathematics of nature, they glimpse the fingerprint of something more, a divine intelligence, not of religion, but of design. He did not speculate, he recorded, as did Berossus, the Babylonian priest, who claimed that gods descended 432,000 years before the Great Flood, bringing the laws of civilization with them. These were not dreams, they were records, uncomfortable, inexplicable, and carefully buried. But mortal ancient beings of great power and knowledge, yet still bound by cycles of rise and fall. His hand stirred behind the scenes of history, not in conquest, but in the quiet planting of seeds, seeds of awakening. Known for their global influence and control over hidden wealth, the family has long been entwined with tales of secret knowledge. Some suggest that their power stems not from gold or banking, but from what they guard, that they, perhaps, descendants of the Watchers, or their human allies. Before the flood, the Anunnaki buried the tablets beneath its foundations, hiding them from both destruction and misuse. The flood came, cities perished, but some say the cipher tablets endure still beneath earth so old it remembers the stars before they dimmed, have inherited a duty to protect the truth until the world is ready to receive it. These were the lost books, spoken of in hushed tones across epochs, glimpsed in ancient citations and footnotes, but never held. Their names survived like ghosts. The Book of Jasher, the Book of the Wars of Yahweh, the Book of Enoch. Each alluded to truths too dangerous or too sacred for public revelation. They were the embers of a time when gods walked side by side with mortals, when destiny was a shared language between the earthbound and the stars. The Book of Jasher spoke not merely of righteousness, but of the ancient laws that governed harmony between heaven and earth. The Book of the Wars of Yahweh hinted at celestial civil war, battles fought not only in the heavens but also in the hearts of men. Said to reside in a vault beneath the mountains of Liechtenstein, guarded not by soldiers but by silence. This trove is claimed to contain the very tablets that vanished from history. Among them, it is whispered, lies the autobiography of Enki himself, spoken aloud over 40 nights and inscribed by his scribe, Adapa, on stones of lapis lazuli. Such stones were not chosen for beauty alone, but for resonance, for their ability to hold memory in crystalline stillness. And the Book of Enoch, perhaps the most haunting, told of beings that descended from the firmament watchers who fell in love with the daughters of men, and who paid the price for revealing forbidden knowledge. His was not the voice of conquest or dominion, but of wisdom subtle, defiant, eternal. In the temple libraries of Eridu, in the shadowed halls of Nippur, and in hidden vaults beneath the sands of forgotten cities, scribes carved the will of the divine into hardened earth. They spoke of creation, destruction, and redemption. They wrote of gods who loved and gods who raged, of celestial battles and sacred oaths, of mankind's accidental birth and its destined burdens. These were not idle myths, they were the blueprint of a world authored by beings from beyond the stars. The philosophy of fate and destiny he had gifted to mankind did not perish with the floodwaters. It lingered, like breath caught between worlds, and passed from lips to clay, from temple to scroll, like a torch never fully extinguished. In the generations that rose from the ashes of Sumer Enkis, truths lived on. The sacred records of those days were etched not only into clay tablets, but into the soul of civilization itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis, the Eridu Genesis. These were not isolated works of imagination, but coded memories preserved with solemn devotion. The epic whispered of a mortal's quest for immortality, a veiled echo of Enki's secret defiance. The Atrahasis told of the flood and the decision to preserve a remnant of humanity not by divine mercy, but by one God's quiet rebellion against annihilation. And the Eridu Genesis, that most enigmatic of texts, bore witness to the act of divine Genesis itself. Enki, shaping mankind from clay and blood, bestowing upon them the seed of consciousness, the capacity for wonder, and the burden of choice. Yet even as these sacred texts survived in fragments, so much was lost. It is said these writings contained the untold accounts of divine conflict, the genealogies of those who bore the blood of stars, and the blueprints of ancient technologies forgotten by the modern mind. Fragments of these books still ripple across cultures. The echoes of Enoch found their way into Ethiopian scripture. In the hidden places of the world where torchlight flickers on stone and the air hums with a weight older than time. Rumors persist of a secret collection, the Mohen archive. If these tablets exist, they would recount the Anunnaki's arrival from Nibiru, the great planet of crimson storms. The claim that these writings are preserved by one of Earth's oldest and most enigmatic bloodlines, the Rothschilds only, deepens the mystery. Yet history teaches us that those who hold such truths often do not share them. Still, not all was lost. One city sipper was said to have held a pre-Diluvian archive. In the 19th century, a glimmer of this past emerged. If that much could survive, hidden beneath the dust of forgotten empires, then what else remains buried? The search for these lost truths is no longer a journey of archaeologists alone. In every epoch, there are those who feel the call, who begin to unweave the veil that time and power have spun. Enki's legacy was never meant to be an empire. And so it was that his philosophy endured, even when his name did not. In Greece, the figure of Prometheus rose, who gave fire to mankind, defying the gods. In Egypt, Thoth emerged, keeper of knowledge, master of words and stars. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brought wisdom and laws, only to vanish in sorrow. And in India, the stories of wise beings descending from the heavens, of Vimanas and divine wars, mirrored echoes, too ancient to be mere invention. What of Marduk, whose desire for dominion drove him to claim godhood through fear? Their influence, too, has not ended. It is a lived battle, waged in the minds of civilizations. Fate, in Enlil's view, was Lorigid, foreordained, unquestionable. Not all are pure in their motives. Some see in the lost technologies a chance for power, for control over human biology, time, energy. But there are others, quiet, hidden, who remember why the Watchers fell, who remember why Enki whispered truth instead of proclaiming it. These guardians work not in palaces or universities, but in silence. His gospel is in the wild places, in the undeciphered tablets, in the dreams of artists, rebels, mystics, and wanderers. In you, in symbols passed down through bloodlines, in dreams entrusted to children born in strange alignment. For the truth of our origin is not a line in a book, but a song remembered line by line in the dark. We are not the children of beasts, we are the memory of the stars made flesh, not the slaves of gods, but their echo, their experiment, their hope. Destiny, in Enki's heart, was fluid, born of choice, of divergence, of rebellion against what seems inevitable. It lingers in systems built on hierarchy, in creeds that punish inquiry, in empires that rewrite history in the image of the victor. The more one awakens, the more one feels the bars of the invisible cage. The stories were never just about gods, they were about us, what we could become, and what we have forgotten we already were. Not a revelation from above, but an unfolding from within. The temples will not be built of stone, but of waking hearts. The stars will no longer be destinations, but mirrors of what lives within each soul. They, too, left their fingerprints, send theocratic power on the distortion of faith, on the suppression of truth. Were these different gods? Or were they one presence in many masks, the same spirit, carried by different tongues, bearing the torch of knowing through the fire of forgetting? What is fate, then, if not a forgotten agreement between soul and star? A memory that sees the gods not as masters, but as elder brothers and sisters, flawed, passionate, afraid, and yet luminous in their striving. The divine impulse that chooses to heal when vengeance would be easier. The voice that whispers, remember, when the world screams, forget. The hand that lifts a child from the flood, even when the law says, let him drown. A memory that places the human spirit not at the bottom of a cosmic ladder, but at the center of a great unfolding. And what is destiny, if not the remembering of that agreement, step by step, through lives and lifetimes? In the lost cities of the Indus, the carvings show serpentine figures and star beings. In Göbekli, 12,000 years older than Sumer, the stone pillars align with constellations long ignored, holding scenes that show men and beasts standing in ritual with skyborn beings. They are a silent language that only awakens when the soul is ready. And now, perhaps for the first time in millennia, that awakening stirs on a global scale. And in the sacred geometry of pyramids, whether in Giza or Teotihuacan, one finds not burial grounds, but encoded maps of stellar order, proportions reflecting celestial harmonies. These are not coincidences. They are messages, seeds left behind by Enki and others like him, meant not for the eyes of conquerors, but for the hearts of rememberers. But what of the others? What of Enlil, who sought order through control? The struggle between fate and destiny, as Enki framed it, is not only a metaphysical concept. This battle plays out still in the questions we are allowed to ask, in the histories we are told, in the spiritual yearnings that institutions fear to name. Even today, there are those who seek to resurrect these truths. It is said that when the final scroll is unsealed, when the last of the lost books is made known, great remembering will sweep the earth. What then becomes of history? It breaks open. It becomes poetry, again not the poetry of fiction, but of memory awakened. In the heart of this mystery lies Enki, not as a deity in the sky, but as a presence within us. He is not gone, he never was. And so the path unfolds not toward certainty, but toward deeper wonder. This is the legacy Enki left behind. This is the song that refuses to be silenced. And though the names change, though the books are burned, though the cities fall, this song, older than time, will rise again. In every question whispered into the void, in every dream that lingers past waking, in every moment when the soul chooses truth over fear, the stars remember. And so, one day, shall we. The winds over Sumer had grown silent, but their silence was not empty. It was the hush of a land that remembered, of stones that had once sung of gods, of rivers that had carried prayers long forgotten, of clay tablets that bore secrets too vast for mortal tongues. Though the temples crumbled and the ziggurats stood cracked beneath the weight of time, something yet lingered in the dust. The echo of Enki's voice, his presence, once woven into the daily rituals of priests and stargazers, had not faded with the passing of empires. His words, entrusted not to gods, but to a single mortal, became a thread of continuity through ages of chaos, conquest, and forgetting. The cities of the plain, Sumer and her sister lands, lay scarred by a fury no man had kindled. The sky itself had turned against the earthlings, poisoned, waters drawn back like breath before a scream, the sun cloaked in dust. It was a reckoning, a war among the stars brought to soil. He stood like a father before a storm, his voice a vibration through stone and soul. The divine had clashed, and mortals bore the cost. That mortal was Adapa, the first scribe, not born of royalty, but of purpose. For though he was of mortal clay, his lineage flowed from the first humans formed by Enki and the healer goddess Ninharsag. It echoed across ages, the flood, the fast, the desert wanderings, It was a time of transformation. He was a priest-king, wise in the divine decrees encoded into the essence of all things. He had walked among the sacred trees, read the stars as language, and drunk from the pools where visions stirred. And yet, even with all his knowledge, he had not imagined that he would become the mouthpiece of a god. A meal had been prepared not of feasting, but of sustenance beyond the flesh, bread imbued with celestial minerals, water steeped in essence not of earth. It was food that stilled hunger and kindled clarity. As he ate, a stillness fell over him, of Marduk's ambition, of Inanna's power lust, of the schisms that widened into wars, of the deluge not, a punishment from above, but a reset demanded by cosmic cycles, of how he Enki whispered into reeds, guiding a mortal named Ziusudra to build an ark not to escape the wrath of gods, but to preserve what was good. The breath of Enki moved through the chamber like wind through reeds, and in him Enki planted a legacy, not carved in monuments, but whispered in script one that would outlive gods and kings alike. Not in wrath, but in remembrance. Humanity would be tested not by fire this time, but by knowledge. Would they rise with wisdom or fall into ruin? Not to please the gods, but to preserve the truth. The record must remain unbroken, of a day when 7 cities vanished in fire, and the air itself became poison, of how the gods wept not for their honor, but for what had been lost. For in these words lie the origin of man, the folly of heaven, and the fate yet to come, of the channels dug, the marshes drained, the first bricks set into sacred alignment, of brother Enlil, who governed with fire, and sister Ninhursag, whose hands gave life. He told of laborers who wearied beneath the burden of digging through rock and soil, whose cries birthed the first humans not as slaves, but as necessary companions, a hybrid child of heaven and earth. Before the silence there had been fire, not the sacred flame of altar or incense, but the burning winds of devastation. And there, standing beneath the soot-stained heavens, was Enkelord of the watery deep, master of the genetic arts, architect of the human form. His heart was heavy, not with guilt, but sorrow. He had defied his own kind to preserve the species he himself had crafted. Where Enlil had demanded obedience and judgment, Enki offered sanctuary. He had warned of the deluge. He had guided the chosen to shelter. From that world had come the Anunnaki, seekers of gold, not for wealth, but for the salvation of their dying atmosphere. They descended not as conquerors, but as craftsmen, intending harmony but finding toil. Beneath the first city of Eridu, his own holy seat, built at the place where the divine first kissed the earth, was a room not marked by inscription or temple offering. It was a chamber forged with precision only the gods could achieve, its walls humming with a silent current, its air cool and saturated with an otherworldly presence. There, amidst crystal-lit alcoves and a writing table carved from ancient acacia, lay the instruments of remembrance, a stylus tipped with divine crystal, a set of tablets, smoother than glass, pulsing faintly with azure light. He had spoken to the hearts of men when the gods no longer would, but words, like water, needed vessels. So Enki summoned Adapa. The place was no ordinary chamber. Enki appeared not in splendor, but in solemnity. Gone were the robes of regal bearing. Adapa, he said, you are more than flesh, you are memory incarnate. Adapa bowed not in fear, but reverence. You shall write, Enki said, for 40 days and 40 nights. The number 40 was no coincidence. It was the divine interval, the sacred span between cleansing and rebirth, exile and return. And so Adapa began. He took his place at the sacred table. With every word spoken, Adapa inscribed. The tale began not with Earth, but Nibiru, that blood-colored planet, whose great elliptical dance brought it near the sun once every 3,600 years. Enki spoke of arrival, of the first landing in Eridu. He spoke of divine jealousy, of the mixing of genes forbidden by decree. Adapa's stylus moved like a river, unwavering. Every moment, every choice, every betrayal, it was all recorded. This was not mythology. It was chronicle. It was testament. Enki's voice faltered only once when he spoke of the weapons, the forbidden ones, the glowing arrows unleashed by Marduk and his allies. And then he spoke of the future. For the cycle was not yet complete. Nibiru would return, and with it the reckoning. The tablets were not merely a record. They were a key, for the truth, though buried, shall call out, and those with ears to hear shall awaken. Right? Enki whispered, so that those who seek will find. And Adapa, with steady hand and open heart, obeyed. The light from the crystalline walls throbbed in slower pulses. The air smelled not of dust, but of myrrh and storm. His hand trembled not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, awe. The final night of transcription was unlike the others. The chamber grew dim, not from shadow, but from a profound quietness, as though time itself held its breath. There he placed the tablets 40 in total, each humming faintly. A current moved through them, subtle but alive, as if they were not merely objects, but conscious in some distant way. Through them shall the line continue, in hidden monasteries, in forbidden scrolls, in whispered stories told by firelight. The thread shall stretch, unbroken, through Babylon, Egypt, India, Greece, even to the distant isles of Albion and beyond the ice. Enki stood behind him not as a distant deity, but as a presence woven through breath and thought. He did not speak for a long time. Instead, he looked upon the scribe with something rare among the divine gratitude. But Enki's legacy was never about worship. His was a legacy of knowledge, of sacred rebellion, of mercy in the face of judgment. He fathered a lineage, not of kings, but of keepers, those who would guard fragments of the truth as the world shifted and the veil grew thick. But through it all, he held fast to the covenant, not with heaven, but with memory, guarded by codes, encrypted not with mathematics, but with myth. The tablets will be read not as history, but as prophecy. You were never forgotten. You were made in the likeness of wonder. And though the gods warred and fell, you endured. You, the dream-born clay, have always been the secret. And Enki's voice carried through the long echo of Adapa's hand. Will speak once more, waiting for the moment when humanity would once again lift its eyes, not to the sky for dominion, but inward, toward remembrance. The geometry hidden in sacred architecture. The unexpected insight that pierced a philosopher's veil. His name changed from Enki to Ptah, to Ea, to Oannes, to the horned serpent, to the watcher by the waters. But his spirit remained unchanged, the guardian of forgotten wisdom, the protector of those who chose the inner path, hidden in the margins of crumbling codices, carved in forgotten languages beneath temple floors, stored in the Mohen collection, all part of a pattern known to few and seen fully by none. You have made a vessel for remembrance. Long after temples fall and stars shift, these truths will stir again. But one day, in the hour of greatest forgetting, a voice will stir in the dust, and the tablets will call not with words, but with longing. But Adapa, humble as ever, did not ask what would become of the tablets, nor what fate awaited him. Enki's gaze turned to the ceiling, as though through it he saw not stone, but the unfolding of future eons, not the strong, not the rich, but the seeker, the dreamer, the broken-hearted, who asked the old questions in the silence between worlds. Some will, he said, others will laugh, many will forget. He walked then to the alcove at the back of the chamber, where a small recess waited like the mouth of time. He sealed the chamber, not with bricks, but with frequentia, harmonic tone that disallowed any but the worthy to find it. Then Enki turned back to Adapa and spoke a final truth. You are not just the first scribe, you are the seed. Your blood carries memory, your descendants the echo, and so it was. Adapa lived a long life, guided by visions and tutored by dreams. In distant times, his name would be confused with myth, and Enki, he too, faded from the shrines. The age of Inanna rose. Marduk took Babylon as his throne. His essence moved in strange ways. He became the whisper in the alchemist's ear, the dream of the wandering sage, sometimes in dreams that did not belong to them, sometimes in moments of deep silence, when the heart spoke truths the mind could not name. For even now the tablets remain, buried beneath dust older than nations, hidden in vaults beneath mountains. One day, it is said, when the cycle nears its close, and the stars realign in the pattern known only to the first architects, the chamber shall open. You were never alone, and so it ends not with a fading, but with a return. The scribe sleeps, but the memory awakens. The god is gone, but the story lives, and the tablets wait not for power, not for praise, but for the one who remembers how to listen. In the quiet expanse between worlds, where the stars whisper secrets too old for time to hold, there drifts a planet of rust and memory. Lamu, the red wanderer, known to modern tongues as Mars, but long before men peered through telescopes or sent their metal emissaries to taste its dust, they encountered the belt of hammered bracelets, what men now call the asteroid field, a tumultuous corridor of shattered worlds and broken dreams. Beneath towering volcanoes and wind-swept dunes lay whispers of buried water, veins of frozen ice, and perhaps the minerals needed to continue their sacred work. Enki, ever the visionary, proposed a bold idea. Lamu would be a resting place between journeys. From it, their chariots rose like phoenixes, connecting Lamu to both Earth and Nibiru in a grand celestial triangle. The red planet, once forgotten, now stood as a sacred midpoint in the Anunnaki's grand endeavor. A celestial tavern where weary chariots might pause, refuel, and ready themselves for the long passage home. Perhaps it was pity, perhaps it was poetic justice, or perhaps some deeper wisdom guided him. Alalu was sentenced not to execution, but to exile, cast away from Nibiru's golden halls, to die alone on Lamu, the red tomb between worlds. Here, they would carve out a sanctuary, not for glory, but for necessity, with eagle helmets upon their heads and fish suits upon their bodies. They took to the sky chamber and landed near the site where Enki had once walked. His limbs grew weak, his voice a whisper, his eyes sunken. The monument, half man and half stone, stared forever toward the heavens, a face gazing skyward, awaiting the return of Godzor, perhaps the curiosity of mankind. Ancient texts, whispered through generations, speak of this tomb, of its solemn visage. of the silent cry it emits through the sands of time. He knew its strategic worth not just as a refueling station, but as a memory anchor. Their shelters on Lemieux, once bright with heat and purpose, fell into silence. Dust choked the halls, storms swept over the landing platforms, and the face of Alalu, half eroded yet still watching, became the only sentry in a world abandoned. A place where the threads of destiny were tied tightly, where kings had fallen, where gods had mourned. Yet, in those final days, he gazed often at the stars, as though seeking answers in their silent dance, not in monuments, but in the heart of a Scribe, son of Enki, keeper of stories, waiting. Within the golden chest of sacred knowledge, the story of Lemieux was etched with reverence. It told of courage and downfall, of exile and loyalty, of a planet that bore witness to both the cruelty and grace of divine hearts. Time, as it moved among the stars, seemed to slow in that solitary corner of the cosmos. He remained. Seasons shifted in colorless rhythm, but he stayed, tending to the tomb with the care of a priest guarding a holy relic. His was a vigil without end marked, not by sunrises, for Lemieux's light held no warmth, but by the unyielding devotion of one who had glimpsed greatness in exile and chosen to carry its memory like flame in the wind. The rhythm of wind carving into red stone became their only music. The breath of a dying monarch and the footfalls of his companion echoed in endless silence. Alalu, whose name had once commanded fear, reverence, and awe across the skies of Nibiru, now slept beneath a mantle of dust, entombed within a turned likeness of himself, his gaze eternally fixed toward the heavens from which he had fallen. Anzu remained at his side, not as a servant, but as a brother. Together they remembered the days of gold and ambition, of hope and fall. Its gravity was gentle. Its winds, though fierce, were manageable. For chariots heavy with gold, it served as a perfect reprieve place to rest, to recalibrate, to mend fractured wings before resuming the climb home. Crystalline communicators pulsed with messages between worlds. The firestones embedded deep within its core systems hummed with life. And when at last Alalu's spirit departed, Anzu carved a tomb from the rock of Lemieux itself. The red world embraced them not with warmth, but with silence. Their shelter, solitary outpost, forged from stone, and memory stood as the last witness to a life once crowned in glory. As the craft circled the moon and arced toward the dusty plains of Lemieux, Alalu beheld the green-blue jewel of Earth one final time. "Let me stay with him," Anzu declared, "before the throne of Anu, until his breath fades. I shall be his companion. Let not a king die alone." A face etched into the terrain of the Sidonia region, a rocky formation that looked too deliberate, too symmetrical, to be mere chance. Was it the tomb of Alalu, weathered by time, yet still defiant? Was it a message carved into a distant world, left for us to rediscover? Anu, stirred by this devotion, made a promise. If Anzu survived, he would be granted dominion over Lemieux in times to come. A world he had discovered, now lost to him forever. Behind them, the stars watched in silence. Ahead, the red winds waited. It was Alalu who had first discovered Earth's golden blood particles that, when suspended in the skies of Nibiru, could mend the torn veils of its atmosphere. Yet, for all his discovery, Alalu's reign ended not in triumph, but in disgrace. For Anu, challenger and claimant, defeated him in the ritual combat, wrestling him to the ground upon the sacred platform. Alalu, enraged, committed an unspeakable act. He bit off the manhood of Anu, sealing his own doom in the blood of shame. Their celestial chariots, sleek as serpents and bright as suns, had to thread through this deadly passage to reach the golden womb of Earth below. But before reaching that fertile sphere, their eyes turned to Lemieux, a planet neither living nor entirely dead. It was Enki, the master of life sciences, the architect of destinies, who first saw potential in the Red Land. While Earth teemed with chaotic life and dense atmosphere, Lemieux stood as a still threshold, harsh, cold, but stable, a place of thin breath, scarred lands, and secrets. Lemieux bore witness to a tale far older, etched into the very marrow of cosmic fate. For it was on this forlorn orb that the saga of Alalu King Rebel, Exile, found its silent end. Long ago, when the Anunnaki first pierced the veil between Nibiru and the inner sanctum of the solar system, its red dust told tales of once flowing rivers and oceans, now long gone, leaving behind canyons that stretched like wounds across its surface. And so the Anunnaki descended upon Lemieux with the craft and conviction of gods. Their firestone engines roared against the silent plains. Near the edge of a long-vanished lake, they set their first Basan outpost of stone drawn from the very red rock beneath their feet. Shelters were crafted, not in grandeur, but in resilience. Their walls thick to block the chill winds, their chambers sealed with atmosphere, harvested and pressurized by crystalline alchemy. Firestones pulsing with radiant energy lit their dwellings and warmed the breathless air. Above them, they constructed a landing platform, precise in its geometry, aligned with the wandering stars. But Lemieux's quiet vigil would take on a far deeper meaning in the time of exile. The throne of Nibiru had once belonged to Alalu, the daring king who defied the slow decay of his world by seeking salvation in the unknown. But Anu, though wounded, chose not death for his adversary. It was Nungal who piloted the chariot with Alalu bound within it. Their descent was not victorious, but mournful. But Alalu would not be entirely alone. Anzu, the pilot whose loyalty ran deeper than blood, made a vow to accompany the fallen king into exile. And so they descended Dalu, broken but proud, and Anzu, steadfast as stone. Alu's end was not swift. The poison that coursed through him, born of his final act against Anu, claimed him slowly. He shaped it in the image of Alalu's face, stern noble, watching. When eons passed and human eyes peered at Lemieux through machines and satellites, they too saw something haunting. The face on Mars became legend. But to the Anunnaki, it had always been truth. Lemieux, though barren, played a vital role in the sacred triangle between Nibiru and Enki, who had once looked upon Lemieux with a scientist's curiosity, now saw it with a sage's vision. Yet, as time passed and Earth's gold reached its purpose restoring, Nibiru's skies the great exodus began. The Anunnaki returned home, their task fulfilled. But even as centuries passed, Lemieux was never forgotten. Its tale was kept alive, not in temples, but in tablets. And somewhere, beneath the red sands, the bones of Alalu sleep. Above him, the face carved in his likeness watches still, waiting for us. And so the days passed, as Lemieux's crimson skies bore silent witness to the quiet grief of a fallen king and his loyal guardian. Anzu, bound by loyalty deeper than blood, did not abandon the red planet after his master's final breath. Enki's vision of Lemieux as a celestial hub had not died with Alalu, though others on Earth and Nibiru dismissed the red world as barren and unforgiving. Enki knew its value extended beyond its immediate usefulness. His eyes had grown deep like forgotten wells, filled with the silence of too many years. He was the storm that changed the sky. When asked why he remained, he merely gestured to the tomb carved in Alalu's image, and granted the authority to oversee the planet's usage for future missions. But even in command, he remained a solitary figure, speaking little, moving softly, as if not to disturb the ancient slumber of the red sands. And in time, even his presence became myth, until the whispers of the Anunnaki on Lemieux faded into legend, first as a mystery, then as a goal. Viking, they called the probe, and like the name it bore, it came not in peace, but as a scout seeking to claim knowledge, to understand, to reconquer a forgotten past. It was Abridja's sacred threshold between what was known and what lay yet to be understood. For they knew what they were seeing. The face of Lemieux, the governments denied, but the echoes grew louder. The resting place of a king outcast not only from his throne, but from time itself. Or had Anzu's craftsmanship been so precise, his reverence so great, that his master's likeness had endured for 500,000 Earth years? Anunnaki firestones, encoded crystals, maps of starlands older than Earth itself. Some dared believe a message was buried there too, a final testament from Alalu, not of warning, but of hope. In these spaces, keepers of the old knowledge continued their quiet vigil, watching the stars, waiting for the signs foretold that what was lost could one day be remembered. The image spread through Earth like a whisper through temple halls, igniting imagination, skepticism, and debate. But those who still held the secrets of the ancient archives, the Mohen collection, the emerald tablets, the sealed clay scrolls of Atapara, cognized it instantly. What had once been sacred became speculative. The gods became stories, and the stories became dreams. And the red planet, once a stop along the golden route between Earth and Nibiru, became a curiosity to the children of the digital age's ancient scars. Mistaken for impact craters, its stone monuments dismissed as tricks of shadow and sand. For, perhaps, in some hidden chamber beneath Lemu's crust, that fire still burned waiting, as all true things do, for the moment of awakening. The air might be thin, the nights bitter cold, but there was something hauntingly alive in the planet's stillness, as if its very soil remembered things the stars had long since forgotten. When the Anunnaki returned, years later, to replenish the way station or investigate anomalies from their crystalline communicators, they discovered Anzu still alive, older, weathered, yet unchanged in his resolve. He was more than king, he said. True to Anu's promise, Anzu was named Keeper of Lemieux, given command of the Outpost, yet Lemieux was not empty. For beneath its wind-worn mesas and blood-colored dunes lay chambers untouched, shelters buried beneath eons of dust, their walls still warm with the faint pulse of forgotten technology. Firestones, dormant but intact, waited in silence. That the stone face of Alalu, weathered by millennia, was more than a tumult, was a sigil, a locked portal whose true nature remained hidden, awaiting the return of the line of Inu, or perhaps the awakening of humankind's latent memory. Their hum was no longer audible, but in the right frequency, through the attuned senses of those trained in the divine arts, they still sang. Some say the planet remembered, that Lemieux itself had become aware of its role as a crucible for cosmic ambition and tragic consequence. For when humanity, in their own age, turned their eyes skyward and sent forth their mechanical chariots into the black void, it was to Lemieux they were drawn. And when Viking's lens revealed the haunting visage in the Sidonia region, those few among the initiates trembled. They remembered the old name Alalu. Was it merely a coincidence, a natural formation mistaken for a face? The scholars argued. For if the tomb still stood, what else remained? There were tales passed down in the whispering houses of the hidden orders that beneath Lemieux's crust, sealed chambers remained untouched, housing instruments that once bent gravity, manipulated time's current, and drew energy from the very fabric of the void. And yet, memory is a fragile thing. As centuries turned to millennia, Lemieux's significance faded from Earth's mythologies. But some remembered, not in public temples or science halls, but in forgotten places where the wind still carried the smell of incense, and the floors were etched with symbols no longer taught. For it had been said that when the face on Lemieux was seen by mortal eyes once more, a cycle would begin again, a cycle of reckoning. A time when the children of Earth would stand between gods and sky, between exile and return, between the tomb and the throne. And still, Alalu gazed upward, his silent stone eyes watching as ships pierced the black sky, watching as humans grew bold, watching for the return of the flame that once burned in Anzu's heart, for the day the dust would lift and the red planet would speak again.